体は剣でできている。血潮鉄で心はガラス。幾度の戦場を越えて腐敗。ただの一度も敗走なく、ただの一度も理解されない。彼のものは常に一人、剣のおかで勝利によう。故に生涯に意味はなく、その体はきっと剣でできていた。
Japanimation Station。
Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station, an anime podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I am Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to dive into the wild and wacky world of anime. This week on the show, it is in some way feels like we are here at like the destination for me, which is we are finally talking about Fate Stay Night. Unlimited Blade Works, the namesake for our second season of Japanimation Station, Unlimited Ufotable Works.
Ufotable Moonworks is the name of the show.
Ufotable Moonworks, thank you. This is the adaptation of the Fate Stay Night visual novel by Type Moon, or it's the adaptation of the second root of that. We're talking about the first half of the show, or the first season of it. And this is like... It feels like it's like the real deal in a weird way, because it is the thing that starts off this whole journey, really is Fate Stay Night, which of course sent Type Moon into the stratosphere, which then got the adaptations of Kano Kyokai by Ufotable, which then brought them all the way around to eventually adapting the second root from that game, and that is what we're talking about today.
Yep, today we are talking about stealth harem anime, Unlimited Blade Works, aka Unlimited Babe Works. Come for the high-concept fantasy action, stay for the tsundere girls, and romance. That is the Fate Stay Night experience.
Yes, I mean, you say stealth, but it's really not stealth, just in the sense of that, like, it is an adaptation of what you'd call a galgay in Japanese. It is a romance visual novel, technically. Because it is, of course, the three roots are based around the three different love interests for the main character. So yes, like this is, it's a pretty different tone and style than Fate Zero, because it is at its core a love story, Fate Stay Night. Like all three of the roots are fundamentally love stories, but that is, of course, kind of what Nasu's deal always is. All of his stories are love stories, even if it maybe doesn't seem like it at first.
Indeed. I mean, we talked about that with Kara no Kyokai. It's very true here. Fate Zero is kind of the odd man out, but also that one not directly written by Kinoko Nasu, obviously. But yeah, so today we are talking about the first season of Unlimited Blade Works, that is episodes 0 through 12, which is really 13 episodes, but is the length of 16 episodes because this season of anime included 3-hour-long episodes, which just, I guess that tells you how big a hit Fate Zero was, because that meant that they got to do whatever they wanted for this. And I have to say, we have previously on the Weekly Stuff podcast talked about Kimetsu no Yaiba, the Demon Slayer adaptation, and season 2 of that show, the Entertainment District arc, we talked about being just one of the most incredible TV productions ever, basically a TV season that looked like a movie. Unlimited Blade Works is in that same category. The production values on this thing are in-fucking-sane from top to bottom. Fate Zero was a very good-looking show, obviously, cut above the pack, but this is just on a different level in terms of visuals. and I'm loving it so far. It is a very, very different show than Fate Zero, obviously. But one of the things I'm most excited to talk about with you, Sean, because you obviously are coming from the perspective of having read Fate Stay Night, you know all this stuff. For me, I'm going through the anime route, basically, of going through Fate Zero, yes. Unlimited Blade Works, Heaven's Feel, the ufotable anime route, specifically. And Unlimited Blade Works really does feel, if I didn't know better, I would just say, oh, this is a direct sequel to Fate Zero. That is what it feels like.
Yeah.
I think ufotable, I'm guessing, again, I haven't read the visual novel, it seems like there's a bunch of things they did that feel like very specific adaptational choices to make this feel like a sequel for all the people who watched Fate Zero. And it works so fully on that level. I don't feel like I'm missing anything, even though there is technically the first route of the game is not adapted by ufotable, maybe one day, but not yet. And it's not sort of here in the chronology. But this was effectively, in terms of anime, the sequel. It feels like that. And it's an absolute blast to watch. Very different show, and I think, this one really reflects the things that this story is doing, just as Fate Zero reflected the things that story was doing with the big ensemble epic. This is much more of an intimate, high school romance comedy with the Holy Grail War going on top of it.
Yes.
But I'm loving it. This show absolutely slaps. It's only been a week since we recorded, but it was very hard to constrain myself and not just marathon these episodes. Mm-hmm. They're fantastic. That is, I know maybe people are getting bored of every episode this season is, man, this thing ufotable made is great. But them's the breaks. They make a lot of good stuff, and that's the point of this season.
Yeah, I definitely ended up watching most of the episodes for this session in one night. Not intending to. It was just like, I just kept on doing it. It's just like, it's the same thing we talked about with Fate Zero. It takes like an inhuman amount of willpower to make the choice to stop watching the show. Because, again, like, I know this story in particular, like, back and forwards, because I've seen this anime multiple times. I've played the game multiple times. But still, like, it is every time I get into it, I'm like, it's so good. But in a very different way than Fate Zero. It's not necessarily the, like, it doesn't have the same level of, like, tension. It's not that same thing of Fate Zero, but it's more that, like, you just kind of get, I think, sucked into the world, into the pace of the story, and with the characters, and it is very much reflects, I think, that thing that the visual novel has, which is, like, once you're kind of in it, it's hard to get out of it, because you just want to stay in that world with all those characters. And it is an amazing feat, watching Unlimited Blade Works, seeing how well they adapt so much of the visual novel, having to, like, compress stuff about it, because, of course, the visual novel is fucking huge. And even just one route is really too much, even for 25 or, like, really 28 or 29 episodes of anime, which is really the actual length of this thing. But it is such a smart adaptation, and it is exactly what you're saying, Jonathan. One of the main things they do is they don't make any huge changes or shifts or anything, but there's lots of subtle things they do to make this more a sequel to Fate Zero than it is just like a straightforward adaptation of Unlimited Blade Works. Lots of very meaningful cuts to Saber when people are talking about shit. Some smart things they do in terms of, like, little things they show you about, like, Reen's past in her relationship with her dad that you just get little glimpses of that's not in the visual novel. Lots of little things they do to make it feel like the anime version of this story is complete, especially now that the Heaven's Feel movies are out and we can move on to those. While I would love to have the Fate route adapted, it doesn't feel critical because of the way they have married Fate Zero to Unlimited Blade Works and used some of the narrative ground that Fate Zero covers to, like, do the same kinds of things that you need to have done for the audience, have that first story that you can understand what Unlimited Blade Works is doing. And of course, in the game, you have the Fate route, which covers all the basics of the Holy Grail War. For the anime, you have Fate Zero covering all of that. So that way this show can push a lot of those concepts further, because as you've already seen in the first half of the show, like, what this Holy Grail War is and, like, the way it plays out is so different because of, like, what Castor is doing, that you need to have had a normal Holy Grail War to, I think, like, enjoy or get out of the premise a lot of what Unlimited Blade Works is doing. And so it's really smart the way that they have tied those things together to make, I think, that anime experience very seamless.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here's a good example, because I wrote down a bunch of these, but I think my favorite one is the introduction of Kotomine Kirei in this show, you have his voice on the phone with Rin, I think in the first episode. Then in episode 2, which is actually the third episode, because they number the first episode as 0, because prologue. But the one called episode 2, when they go to the church and meet Kirei, you get his voice first, the sonorous voice of Joji Nakata, and then you have this cut where he turns to camera, and then we cut to the act break. And that's where we would go to commercial if this was airing on TV. That is very clearly an adaptational choice you make, assuming the audience knows who this person is and has a pre-existing relationship with, like, the gravity of this figure. Oh, he's coming back into the story. And so what it winds up feeling like, because they do things like that all over the place. Obviously, like, the doling out of Gilgamesh in this first season. I have no idea what his overall role will be in this story because he's only been kind of on the sidelines so far, but I feel like every cut to him is just laced with the, you saw Fate Zero and we're gonna tease you with this, you know? But it kind of has this legacy sequel sort of feeling. Sort of like, you know, the new Star Wars movies or Creed or something like that, where you have a newcomer in the case of Shirou, and then all of these children of other characters from the original piece, coming into this world with all these sort of pre-existing conflicts that they're learning about. This is not a legacy sequel, obviously. Fate Stay Night was its own thing, and Fate Zero was a prequel written later. But the way it's been adapted, it kind of gives you that sort of rush of, okay, we're coming in with a new character, but it's a world we, the audience, know. And I assume some of that is built in because Unlimited Blade Works is the second route, and so you would know things if you were playing this in the visual novel that way. But maybe we should back up, and Sean, you know, you've talked about this a bit on the first Fate Zero episode, but do you just want to recap for us sort of the structure of Fate Stay Night and what it means that we're talking about this is adapted from the second route? What, in broad terms, is the first route doing that we're maybe missing or that Fate Zero filled in for us? I'm curious about all of that.
Yeah, so Fate Stay Night has 3 different routes in it, but unlike most visual novels, those routes must be played in a specific order. So it's only after you clear Route 1, or what's called the Fate route, that you get the choice near the beginning of the game, which I believe is, if I remember correctly, it's when in the anime Shirou uses the command seal to stop Saber in episode 1 when she's fighting Archer, like right at the beginning. I'm pretty sure that's the choice. I can't exactly remember, but I think it's something around there. But basically that option opens up for the player. So then once you pick this new choice, it then shuffles you onto the second route called Unlimited Blade Works. You play through that route. And then once you've played through that route, you start the game from the beginning. And then now a very early option is opened up there that then allows you to get onto Heaven's Feel, which is the third and final route. And then again, each route is, because it is like a visual novel from that era in particular, and so it is a galgame, again, or like gal game, or girl game, however the fuck you want to translate that term. It is fundamentally structured around Shirou having 3 love interests, Saber, Tohsaka, and then Sakura, and then each route is for each of those characters. And so the Fate route, which is broadly or loosely adapted in the Studio Dean anime from 2006, which we're obviously not covering because it's not a ufotable thing. That route is the Saber route, and that's one of the reasons why Fate Zero, I think, is able to kind of take its place in some ways. What we are not going to get is we're not going to get a true resolution to Saber's character. They do some stuff in this anime in the Unlimited Blade Works to give her a little bit stronger of a clear resolution. But you're not going to get the full resolution of her character, which is her kind of overcoming a lot of her regrets and her desire to change her past and, the fate of Britain and the tragedy of King Arthur and all that, right? The reason why Saber has become a heroic spirit and why she's participating in these Holy Grail wars is fundamentally so that she can undo her own rule and her own legacy to try to avoid the tragedy that her rule inevitably leads to. And her relationship with Shirou eventually leads to her realizing that that is a mistake, because Shirou, despite everything that has happened to him, does not actually want to, he has no desire to use the Holy Grail to undo the tragedy that, kind of has made him who he is, the Great Fire from the end of Fate Zero. And it's kind of that relationship between the two characters allows her to be kind of released from that desire. And so that's a big part of what the story of the original Fate route is. But that also means that the original Fate route covers so much of the backstory of Saber, which is stuff that Fate Zero also goes over about her regrets and those kinds of things. And so you have a built-in association for Saber and who she is as a character and her personality and her like broad relationship, her thematic relationship with Shirou. All that stuff is stuff you have coming into Unlimited Blade Works with the game. It is also what you have if you watch Fate Zero coming in with the anime. And it's why I think it's able to serve as an effective like replacement, is because a lot of that similar information is stuff that's covered. The other thing that the Fate route does that Unlimited Blade Works and Heaven's Field don't do is it has a pretty straightforward Holy Grail war, like what Fate Zero has, right? Like the concept of the Holy Grail war, you have 7 masters, each master has a servant, and then they fight each other, and then, you know, until there's like 2 left, and then there's a big duel to get the Holy Grail. That is fundamentally, you know, there's a big twist at the end in both Fate Stay Night, Fate, and Fate Zero. But they generally kind of follow a pretty like simple path in terms of there's not a lot of twists in how that Holy Grail war unfolds. It plays that concept fairly straight for the most part. That then allows Unlimited Blade Works to go more exotic with that concept by having Caster. We have already seen her. She has like, you know, she has made a contract with Saber. She has 2 servants effectively of her own. So like the way this Holy Grail war is unfolding is breaking all kinds of rules, which is only meaningful if you have already had a normal Holy Grail war. It would be like a very bizarre thing to do, to have a story where you set up this premise and then you're already breaking all the rules you set up with it. And then Heaven's Feel will go even further and have an even more kind of exotic version of the Holy Grail war, because those roots kind of get to be sequels to themselves in that way, because they get to push the premise in a way that sequels often are able to push the core premise of their franchise. You know, like Empire Strikes Back gets to be more thematically complex than the original Star Wars because it gets to build off of all the world building that Star Wars established. It's a similar kind of thing with Fate Stay Night. And so I think it's very smart that ufotable, in approaching them doing their own anime adaptation, said, let's skip the Fate route. There is already, even if it's not particularly beloved, there is an anime adaptation of that route out there. Like, Unlimited Blade Works is a more interesting story than the Fate route because it gets to be more extreme, and they've already covered it with Fate Zero. And so there's like stuff where ufotable, the people at ufotable talked about, there was a big discussion amongst the main leads at that studio when they decided to tackle a Fate Stay Night anime adaptation, which happened after they did movies for the, not movies, but like the opening movies for a re-release of the game, and ufotable animated those, and that's where they're like, Fate Zero is our most successful and beloved project. Why don't we just like do a Fate Stay Night thing? And then once they got the go ahead from Type Moon to do that, they had to decide, how do you adapt it? And there was an instinct to say, let's just do the Fate route again. But then ultimately they said, no, like that material is covered. Let's push the story further and go to Unlimited Blade Works. I think it is absolutely the right choice because I think there's a fairly seamless progression in the story there that allows you to get more to the meat of what the story of Fate Stay Night is about. That starts more with Unlimited Blade Works, rather than having to do more of the preliminary material, which is what the Fate route covers.
Yeah, and that's really interesting to me because obviously this is a complex sort of web of stories to unpack and talk about here. But I think, you know, the benefit of it is obviously there is shared material between the 3 routes as you're talking about. And so, you know, you don't lose any like setup with Shirou as a character. It doesn't seem like, at least if there is something there, I'm not missing it from what I'm watching.
Like the first episode 0 and episode 1 of Unlimited Blade Works would be identical if they had done a Fate route. Like those would be absolutely the same episodes, because that is, like I said, the split point is basically right at the end of what is called episode 1 here. That's where the choice is made that moves you to Unlimited Blade Works. And even then, most of the material in episode 2 is pretty similar to what it would have been in the Fate route. It's only after episode 2 that it really starts to diverge.
Yeah, so that's, you know, that's one benefit is you have that. And then, yeah, it does feel like you get into the meat of it right away. It is, you come in with this pre-existing knowledge, whether it is if you're playing the visual novel from the Fate route, or if you're watching the anime from Fate Zero, but you're coming in with this pre-existing knowledge of this is the Holy Grail War, this is what it looks like. Last time around, we saw these kind of characters. Oh, this time around, we're seeing these kinds of characters, and it is very different. I mean, right off the bat, you've got, you know, Saber is the only one of the returning servants. Gilgamesh is in there somewhere, but is not initially like one of the 7, obviously. I'm not entirely sure what Gilgamesh's deal is. That's probably a season 2 conversation, is what I'm guessing, because he's not in this one much. But you have Saber as the only returning one, so everybody else is different. We've got a new caster, new archer, new lancer, all of those characters, right? Obviously, all of the masters are different. Kotamine Kirei is there. You've got some other sort of returning figures or people related to returning figures, like obviously Tohsaka Rin. But otherwise, they get to be their own characters. And of course, the cast is just a very different kind of cast because most of the masters are high school students in this one. It's all happening around a high school. It's got much more of a sort of slice of life feel to it. This one is much more episodic. Fate Zero was, very propulsive episode to episode. Unlimited Blade Works tends to have sort of stories or ideas that get not wrapped up, but every episode is kind of a thing unto itself, and then you kind of move on to them. There's sometimes little time gaps between them, all sorts of things like that. It's more comedic in tone. In Fate Zero, your main source of comedy was Rider and Waver Velvet, and even then, that doesn't end comedically. So, you've got that. Here, you've got lots and lots of laughs, even though it is still a fairly serious story in lots of ways. So just as a sequel, it works really well on all of those dimensions of what you want a sequel to be, in that it feels like you're continuing the story, but you're expanding the world, kind of in an ideal, almost like a Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam kind of way, right? Where you advance the timeline, you have a new point of view character, but you're in the same world, and it just works really well in all of those ways. And I'm loving it. So if you were, Sean, I know you were curious at the start of this season, how does the sort of ufotable anime route through the Fate world kind of operate for a newcomer? So far for me, pretty much no hiccups, other than there being that episode of Fate Zero that is about Rin that you really wouldn't, I think, have a story about her unless you knew she was going to be important later because it's a prequel. Other than that, if you told me this was just a series of original anime that were made kind of in sequence, I would believe you. It works very seamlessly that way, and I think that's high praise to ufotable for adapting it that deftly.
Yeah, I think it's very smart because, again, there's not a lot that they're doing to Unlimited Blade Works to do that. Like, it's just a lot of very smart little things. I think one of the big things that this is just kind of a coincidence that it works so well in this fashion, but it works perfectly, is that the opening of the show, episode 0 and episode 1, that is exactly the opening of the game. So the opening of the game has a prologue section, which is a big prolonged sequence that is narrated basically from Tohsaka's point of view. It's the only prolonged sequence in Fate Stay Night that is not from Shirou's POV. Like, there are lots of little tiny scenes that are, that will cut to somebody else's POV temporarily. But in general, you are very much in Shirou's head. He's the main character. He is the player surrogate in many ways when you play Fate Stay Night. But you do have this big prologue with Tohsaka. And so they play that out, and it's exactly what the anime does. It goes up to like Saber coming out, and that big like kind of little fight or encounter between Archer and Saber. It then goes kind of rewinds back to the beginning of that sequence of days, and now you're from Shirou's point of view, and you see those like 2 or 3 days from his POV leading up to him summoning Saber in like that really iconic scene from the game. That they reproduce like exactly, they do the exact same framing and everything of that CG of when he summons Saber. And then I believe that is where, if you're playing the game, you get the big opening theme that plays in that opening animation movie, and all that kind of stuff is after that point. So that opening episode 1 or episode 0, episode 1 thing is precisely the way the game opens. But when you come from Fate Zero, starting with Rin as your POV character makes perfect sense. And they do one little thing where they add this scene at the very beginning of episode 0 that's a dream sequence she has of her as a little girl seeing her dad, and you see her mom and his dad like goes away or whatever. That frames it directly in her like relationship of what we saw her last as this little girl and her relationship with her father that we knew from the previous show. And that's like the only major thing they adjust to frame it very much as, oh, Tohsaka Rin is a logical protagonist character to carry on from Fate Zero. She is the daughter of one of the major characters from the previous show. She had, of the sort of more supporting cast, she had a more notable role, partially because they gave her that one episode. It like makes a lot of sense that you would then follow up with that character in that almost like legacy sequel kind of way that you're describing. And you use her as a window into this world. And then you shift to Shirou's perspective, who we saw very briefly in Fate Zero, but he wasn't really a character. He was more like a symbol in many ways at the end of Fate Zero. And then he becomes our actual protagonist. But of course, Unlimited Blade Works is the story of both Shirou and Rin. So it's another thing that works really well for the anime's favor, is that prologue. Rin is a major character in all three of the routes, but this is her story with Shirou. And so having the paired opening episodes also is a perfect idea for Unlimited Blade Works, because it means that structure is shared throughout the whole show. Like season 1 of Unlimited Blade Works, which actually I think works as a season of television, unlike Fate Zero, where it just feels like an arbitrary stopping point to for the sake of production. But the season 1 is about these two characters coming together and splitting apart again, and it opens up with them with each getting their own episode from their POV that gets to establish those characters. So it's just I think an incredible usage of the original structure of the visual novel, of kind of not really changing anything about it other than a couple little details, but using it as is for a different purpose that is so effective that when I watched those two openers for this podcast, I was really struck thinking about it from the perspective of, if the only thing you'd seen was Fate Zero, how perfectly that works as an opening, even though they didn't do much to change it.
It's extremely striking. I mean, it just feels like a perfect sort of place to start a sequel in two ways. One, I think, having the first hour of this show be a full, in the ufotable fashion, full hour-long episode with one POV in Rin, and then, of course, you get a second one with full POV in Shirou. It kind of teaches you how to watch it, that immediately you go, okay, this is very different. Fate Zero was an ensemble where the first hour of Fate Zero, you meet dozens of characters. You meet all the masters, you meet all the servants, other than, I think, Castor and serial killer boy Ryunosuke, who are introduced in episode 2. But other than that, Fate Zero, you meet everybody, you see it, you are taught that this is a show where we're going to jump around, and we kind of have a bird's eye view of the world. In Unlimited Blade Works, you do not have a bird's eye view. It is, by the end of season 1, you still don't know things like who is Lancer's master and things like that, right? Mm-hmm. You have not met some of the characters in depth. You are very much in Tohsaka Rin's perspective in that first episode. You're in Emiya Shirou's perspective in that second episode, and you're mostly with Shirou, but often with Rin. You have them together, and it is their story, and it is much more... It's weird to say smaller scale about a story as big as Fate Stay Night, but it is smaller scale. It's more intimate. It is about these two people and about the things sort of in their immediate line of sight. But then also, as you say, me watching it as a sequel to Fate Zero, I was writing in my notes oh, okay, well, you're immediately thinking about the death of Tokiomi Tohsaka, right? And you're thinking about the circumstances about that. When you meet Rin, you have this sense of, we see her, now she's grown up, so you get an immediate sense this is a generational story. We're 10 years later. When you see Sakura, who is not a big character so far, and she's introduced as, Mato Sakura, there's just this pang of sadness in your chest. There's a question of, what relationship do these sisters have now? Because we saw... Karia in Fate Zero fight so hard to reunite them, then he fails and maims their mother because Kotomine is a bastard. And all of that stuff, I think they move through exposition on the Holy Grail War and stuff like that in a way that I think assumes, in the way Unlimited Blade Works as a route probably assumes, that you know what this stuff is. And so I think all of that it does feel like... it feels like a sequel, and it feels very fun that it just kind of gets right down to business, but in a different way. This is a slower show. This is a funnier show. This is a more romantic show. But yeah, it's extremely fulfilling as someone who obviously loved Fate Zero. And I didn't have to wait several years the way people in the real world did. Yeah. This wasn't that much later, all things considered. Fate Zero was 2011 and 2012. This is 15 and 16. But yeah, it's so good.
Yeah, it is phenomenal. And one of the things that's interesting about the opening is that, it has kind of the opposite effect of the opening from the game, where in the game, if you're assuming you're someone, for me, I had no preconceived notions about it. I had never read anything that Natsu had ever done before. So all the stuff of the Holy Grail War and magic and everything about the setting was completely new and alien to me. And so the Tohsaka opening is there to create this air of mystery where it's who the hell is this girl? What is all this stuff she's on about? Because it doesn't exposit a lot directly to the player during that prologue section. It's more about you kind of getting dropped into the midst of the action and trying to figure out and piece together what is going on here. And then when the POV shifts to Shirou, that's where it's much more comfortable, because while he knows a little bit about magic, kind of, he's got a little tiny like toe that he's stuck into that world, but generally speaking, he's not really a part of that world of magic. He's as much ignorant about it as we are, because most of the things he thinks he knows about it are actually kind of wrong, which actually kind of works even better for him as an expositionary character, because he assumes things that are incorrect, people get to correct him on stuff, which I think is a more natural way for exposition to happen than just to like lecture to someone who's totally ignorant. But once it's just Ishido's POV, that's where you're like, you feel in the visual novel, you're at home, because it also, the way it's written, it's much more clear. This is the character we're going to be sticking with. Whereas in in Unlimited Blade Works, like the TV anime, I feel like it's Tohsaka's POV is the one you're much more comfortable with, because you know her already. You know this world. You're like used to the Holy Grail War stuff. You've seen servants get summoned. All of that is normal to you. And so then when you shift to Shiro's POV, who's a character that you only know a little bit through his like relationship to Kiritsugu, that's where you're a little bit more alienated, because you're trying to figure out, who is this kid really? Like, what is his deal? What has his life been like? Like, what is going on with Sakura, who is a character that in the game you would have no idea anything about her. You'd have no concept that she is Tohsaka's little sister. There's foreshadowing, because Tohsaka seems to have like care about Sakura in this weird way. You see that all that foreshadowing is here in the anime as well, but you have no idea that there's anything going on you there. You just think that she's like a nice kohai who has a crush on senpai from the archery club, and that's it. And so it's very interesting to me that way that through the adaptation, again, without really doing anything to change this, just translating that structure in an intelligent way gives you this very opposite effect, but an opposite effect that like works exactly towards the purposes of what Unlimited Blade Works is trying to do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a really interesting way to talk about it, because I had that effect, Sean, where like the Tohsaka episode, I'm like, okay, I'm kind of re-seeing things I already know. I know how magic works. I know what the Holy Grail War is. I kind of know what Reen's deal is coming into this story, and that felt like the kind of getting us up to speed on the shape of the world. And then you go over to Shirou, and I'm like learning about this kid and his world in a way that is kind of like Kara no Kyokai, in that the first one is about Shiki, and there's a lot of mystery there. But then when you get to the second episode and you expect things to maybe be explained, that's when you really get to know Kokuto, and you're like, this guy's kind of weird, you know? And I think Shirou Emiya has that same quality, obviously, because I've seen Kara no Kyokai, I've seen Fate Stay Night, I'm reading Witch on the Holy Night. The main boy protagonists in Kinoko Nasu's works are all sort of cut from a fairly similar cloth in terms of their emotional relationship to the world around them. And Shirou Emiya has a similar thing, where his, deal specifically is that he is just inhumanly helpful to people around him. And he doesn't seem to desire much for himself. He is not sort of as like eerie about it in the way Kokuto can kind of be a little bit, almost come across as like sociopathic about it. Emiya is a very passionate person. But it's interesting to sort of come into it, and now you're interested in this character mystery around it, because you know the shape of the world. That's not what you're so interested in. You're interested in, okay, and we have some guess as to why Shirou is the way he is, because we know about the fire and Kiritsugu and all of that. But, what is his relationship to these people? Why does his teacher come and live with him? And, like, he calls her, Fujine, basically Big Sister Fuji. Why does Sakura always stay over? All of these sorts of things are what you're interested in on a character level. And that's a really cool shift coming from Fate Zero, where, you're very invested in sort of the plot right off the bat, right? Because there's so much going on. And this one becomes character driven, really, because like the plot of season 1 of Unlimited Blade Works is pretty loose, I think it would be fair to say, and not in a bad way at all. Just that like there is sort of the main overriding thing of season 1 is sort of the confrontation with Castor, but it's not even there's a confrontation that we resolve at the end of the season. It's a confrontation that goes the Empire Strikes Back route of we lose, right? And so then we're going to go into season 2 that I assume will be more narratively propulsive because you've got a lot of dominoes to fall. But overall, it is really about these two characters, Shirou and Rin, circling each other. And so it is all character driven. It is about learning about these people and their relationship to the world around them and to each other. And on that level, it is just, fantastically interesting. It is, Kinoko Nasu as a writer is so interesting to me because he comes up with some of the highest concepts you could come up with in his work. But what he's really interested in is almost stuff on the slice of life level. It is the characters and their interiority and their relationships and how they view the world. And that's very much filtered here. Whereas, you see the different sensibilities of like Urobuchi Gen in Fate Zero that is more narratively propulsive in that way. And this one does have that more Nasu kind of, I mean this in a good way, meandering a little bit in ways that I think tell you about the characters in the world.
Yeah, because I think, one of the cornerstones of Nasu's style and his influences is, our mystery stories. And it's, clearly it's, one of the main things he's interested in. And not necessarily in a, detective story kind of way. Cont no Kyokai has echoes of the detective story stuff, but it's not really what it is. But all of his stories are so much about, trying to uncover mysteries, particularly about, the people in them, right? And particularly it's the Nasu protagonist character, the male protagonist character, who, as you say, very much has this quality. It is true of, obviously, Cont no Kyokai. It's also very true of Mahotsukai no Yoru, or Witch on the Holy Night, with Sojuro, that character. And then you've got Shirou here, that all of them are people who I think fit into a broad archetype that and kind of expect from this sort of story. In this instance, it's very much like the harem, the kind of romance anime / visual novel protagonist character that as you kind of dig at them, you start to realize more and more there's something weird about this kid. He's not normal. And it's also that he's he's not abnormal in the ways you would expect somebody to be abnormal as a protagonist character. There's something weird about him. And very much this season 1, I think, is so much about Dean slowly realizing that all of the things she thinks she assumes about who Shirou is as a person are wrong, right? And it's this slow process of her realizing, he's not just an idiot. It's not even really that he is brave. It's there's something else going on with him that is disturbing, because the more you pick at him, the more you realize that there's kind of nothing underneath, right? That he has no desires, really. He has nothing of his own that he is and that he's working towards. He has this dream of being a hero of justice or whatever, but that is such a vague ideal, and he has no idea how to get towards it. And it is something, as Archer points out, is something that he has borrowed from somebody else. It's not something that is purely of his own. He is just taking somebody else's dream and has made it his own. And he's not motivated by any want or desire that comes from within himself. And there's something very disturbing about that. And the season is very much about slowly picking away at those layers, especially for Tohsaka, and realizing that there's something going on with this kid. And that mystery element to the story is, I think, one of those things that makes it feel stylistically very different than Fate Zero, because it's true of Shirou's characterization, but it's also true of all the things in the world. I didn't even realize until, I was thinking about this as seasons, that by the end of season 1, you only have one servant, assassin / Sasaki Kojiro, whose true name has been spoken. If you know enough about mythology, you can figure out who Lancer and Castor are. But other than Sasaki Kojiro, that is the only servant whose true name has actually been spoken at this point in the show. And so very much a big part of Fate Stay Night is everything is shrouded in mystery, including the identity of who are you fighting? What is the Holy Grail War? What is all of this shit? And some of those things are things that you will know from Fate Zero already. But that kind of being shrouded in this fog of ignorance that the characters are in is part of the thing that gives it this more kind of novelistic, more meandering plot structure than something like Fate Zero that is so propulsive, because you're this eye and God eye view, seeing everything and being able to move to whatever character you need to for the moment. Here you're following along these characters as they're moving through this fog, trying to figure out who they are and what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much there to talk about. I mean, one thing that is just on my mind, because I'm also reading this at the same time we're doing all this stuff, is that I think we will need to like tack on a Mahotsukai no Yoru episode to this season, Sean, because we're both playing the visual novel. It's fresh. It's just come out here in the United States for the first time. And, that was the first thing in this whole cycle of works that Nasu wrote, even though it was the last one to eventually be published as a visual novel. But it is so clear that, like, everything after Mahotsukai no Yoru is like taking those ideas and reorienting them in different ways. It's really fascinating to read, kind of parallel to these other stories, because it's everything kind of comes from that visual novel, which is much, much smaller scale than any of these other ones. But is so clearly like setting the tone for all of those. And one of the things Mahotsukai no Yoru does is, you have your main character, and your POV character for most of it is Aoko Aozaki, who is, a witch. And at the beginning, you would think she's going to be the mysterious one, but she's pretty much an open book. And the more you play, the more it becomes clear that it's sort of the boy opposite her, Sojiro, who is the one that we're kind of wanting to get to the bottom of, who has a mystery literally kind of on his body that we don't know about and things like that. And that's absolutely fascinating. And then I think you see that here. It's just the thing that Nasu kind of moves to is, and this is what is so fascinating about what I've seen of Fate Stay Night so far, is putting the POV character and the person who's kind of mysterious in the same position of having Shirou Emiya be our POV, be our access point, be the person we learn things through, but then we also slowly realize we are learning about, and it kind of challenges some of your preconceived notions about protagonists and fiction and these sorts of things, in the same way I think Kara no Kyokai does with Kokuto in various places. So yeah, it's fascinating. And also not to just be too intellectual about it, I fucking love these characters. They're great. They're just such warm, wonderful characters to be around. Shirou's world is so kind of beautifully drawn. I don't mean it is drawn beautifully in terms of animation. We'll get to that. But I more mean just like it's so beautifully fleshed out. I love kind of the sense of you get a really real feeling for, okay, this is the estate he lived in with Kiritsugu. He's been on his own for a while, but he had these people in his life who care about him because they care about him or because they cared about Kiritsugu or both. And so he isn't really alone, but he is kind of lonely. And just seeing that all kind of come together, and then having Rin come in as kind of the newcomer to this section of the world while he is a newcomer to her section of the world. It is just a delight to see all of that play out. And when you get to the final couple episodes, and you have at that point 4 women regularly staying in his little house, and he is just, and you realize, oh shit, this kid's in the middle of he thought he was in the middle of a Holy Grail war. He's in the middle of a harem anime, and it's just so fascinating and fun to kind of pick apart and watch. And it is funny, and it is sweet, and it is also smart and soulful and a little bit tragic. And that that blend of things is so appealing and is so compulsively watchable.
Yeah, there's such a rich variety to the tone in Fate Stay Night, because it is able to go from, like, this kind of classic high school anime humor stuff, and particularly Fujimoto Sensei, who I just think is the most fucking hilarious character. Every time that character gets to be on screen is the best. And you get to have all that, and you get to have your kind of classic, harem anime jokes of the girls keep on moving in to his house and all that kind of stuff. And Shirou is just, hapless amidst this. But then you also get these like moments of, obviously like high action when you get into the action stuff, but you also get these like very quiet, very sad moments. And I think it's particularly that first episode where you get to really just spend a couple of days in Shirou's shoes. And it's those moments where, like, Sakura has left and Fujimoto Sensei has left, and you see this boy living alone in this giant, ridiculous Japanese manor with this big courtyard, and he goes to go train in this little stone hut off to the side, and he doesn't even really know what he's training for. He doesn't really know how to train in magic because Kiritsuga never really taught him anything, and so he's just sitting there, like, trying to strengthen pipes and stuff like that. In this, like, very teenage boy idea of, like, what working out is. You also see that, that he's fit, but it's also, like, he's exercising very aimlessly, and he's training very aimlessly. And there's such a lonely, like, malaise to all of that once all these people go away, that all that warmth goes with them, and he's just left alone in that house. And it's, like, such a, I think, key moment for the show to begin with, is that you see that part of his life, that, he gets to be, people love him because he is very nice and he's very sweet and he's always trying to help people. But once they're gone, there's like kind of nothing left for him. And that's, I think, a very like key moment that the show shows you right at the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like the driving question once you get to the end of season 1 is less even about who's going to win the Holy Grail War or some of these big, plot things. It's really kind of like, what is the state of Shirou's soul on his own without these other people, And you see people, and the person, of course, who comes in and recognizes this first is Archer, who can look at him and go, something's off about you, and it bugs the shit out of me. He's the only person who doesn't like Shirou. Saber takes an immediate liking. Rin has this sort of, mage posture where she's supposed to be cold to outsiders, but she really doesn't have that personality. She puts it on, but she's not good at it. In a way that Aoko Aozaki is the same way, kind of in Witch on the Holy Night. And so she immediately just decides, okay, I'm going to just be friends with this guy. Even when she tries to kill him, she's really not trying to kill him, if you think seriously about it. And so everyone likes him except Archer, because Archer seems like he can kind of cut to the heart of this person more. And of course that is a mysterious central relationship to the show and is really fun to watch. But you get to the end and it is this, because we literally leave with him in a very Kara no Kyokai fashion, standing on the edge of a building, on the edge of a boundary. What will he do next? With Rin literally saying, if you get involved in this again, you will die. Final words, cut to Lisa singing over the credits. Beautiful song that perfectly encapsulates the themes of the season in the ufotable manner. And that's the question you're left with. And that is part of why it's such a good season of TV, is because it throws a lot of nets out in the water. And then I think when it pulls them all in at the end, you kind of come down, you've whittled down to this idea that even with as many things as there are to learn about and to see, that's kind of the driving question into season 2, which makes me very excited to finish this podcast and then go watch season 2 of Unlimited Blade Works. Yes. I'm being disciplined. I'm not watching ahead, but I want to.
Yes. No, yeah, because it's something I think is super impressive, is how elegant the structure of the season is, because obviously, there is no designed midpoint or something of the story in the visual novel. Like it's not seasonal or something, and it's not even like really chapter based like that. It is a little bit episodic in the structure of the story, because you've got like, these multiple different kind of foes, and it's like, okay, here's the part where they're going to fight Emiya in Berserker. Here's like now like Caster comes in. And so some of that structure helps kind of pace out the story. I mean, and visual novels typically are kind of like this. I mean, Mahoutsukai no Yoru very much has there is, an episodic structure to the way that the plot unfolds in that game as well. But I think they're very smart in trying to pace out the season such to find this nice midpoint where it is about, this season is so much about these two people, Dean and Shirou, trying to learn who the other person is. And they both learn at the end of episode 12, right? So like Tohsaka learns, oh, this is what Shirou's deal is. Like, he is the boy left behind from that disaster whose entire life was ruined by the Holy Grail. Like, his past is far more tragic than I think she could have ever kind of like countenanced. And then he learns that she saved his life because he finds the jewel pendant in her room and learns like, oh, Tohsaka, like, you are as like generous and heroic as like I am or what I'm trying to be. But she hides it under her like, tsundere girl, like sort of tough exterior in the mage thing. And so it is such an elegant way of structuring this whole season, of starting with these two characters apart with your two openers. They're trying to figure each other out. They find out who the other person is in episode 12. And then it ends with this point of decision where they separate again, Tohsaka going off with Archer to fight Caster, and Shirou being left behind with a choice of like, what do you do at this point when you're left truly powerless? Is it meaningful to continue pursuing your ideals and everything in the face of this? And it is something that, I finished watching episode 12 last night, and I was struck again by how nice and elegant they have made the whole season. It's such a smart adaptational structure.
Yeah, and Fate Zero, as you say, is a much more utilitarian split. That's really it's one season with a split core because they just needed a couple months to do the animation. This is effectively the same thing. They made it in 2 chunks so they could do, the best work they could do on it. But it feels like there was a very conscious, like, maybe because of a recognition of where the story would roughly split or whatever, of like, okay, we can really make this 2 seasons of television. Whereas saying Fate Zero has 2 seasons feels a little wrong. It's like, it's 2 halves for a production sense, but you would never know it watching it. This one has the full-on, ufotable movie credits at the end of episode 12, which is really episode 16, kind of, because of how many hour-long episodes we have. But no, it is so good, and it is so well-structured, and I'm loving it. It's everything I'm being exposed to from the Kinoko Nasuverse, I'm in love with. And of course, Ufotable gives things the royal treatment, and they are just perpetually very, very smart about adapting things, and it's so cool to see kind of how this studio's brain works when taking these exclusively very ambitious works. I don't think they've ever taken on an easy adaptation. They've never done the layup of like, here's, this is, I mean, Demon Slayer is a layup in the sense that it's a popular manga, but I don't think it's actually that easy an adaptation to do.
No.
I think I could imagine a Demon Slayer anime falling really short in different hands. And of course it does not in their hands. And I think obviously Fate Stay Night did fall short previously in an anime adaptation. It's a hard thing to do. And they've done it beautifully. And part of that is because they did Fate Zero beautifully. And speaking of beautifully, the animation on this show, Sean, this feels like maybe the moment where Ufotable leveled up and became like the Ufotable we know from Kimetsu no Yaiba. Not to put down anything in the previous stuff we've talked about. Obviously, Garden of Sinners is a stunning production. Paradox View in particular, or Paradox Spiral in particular, being one of the coolest animated movies ever made. And Fate Zero is, especially for its moment in anime history, a very handsome production. But Unlimited Blade Works is on a just completely different level. Yeah. This just looks like a movie in 25-minute chunks. It is an incredible piece of animation, particularly the backgrounds. Like, oh, okay, because I've mentioned this before, how much I love the backgrounds in Ufotable stuff, and I could feel it kind of coming together in Garden of Sinners. I think it's a little less in Fate Zero, because that's a TV production, and then you get here and you're like, these are so ludicrously detailed, there are so many colors being used. Even in just little backgrounds that you see in one shot, there will just be a level of detail that is mind-boggling. Some of that surely comes from they're adapting a visual novel and they have those CG background, what they call CG in visual novels in Japan. It doesn't mean what we refer to as CG, but the sort of the hand-drawn or digitally drawn backgrounds, which in visual novels will tend to be very, nice and ornate and that sort of thing. And they have all of that to draw from, and it feels like they're making a conscious effort to match that. But I'm watching this and I'm like, okay, whatever method they came up with to do these fucking backgrounds that blow my mind every time I see them, that's what they carry into Kimetsu no Yaiba, which has the exact same effect in a lot of ways. And also I think the character animation is just... There will be little, Tohsaka Rin taking a step and kind of like putting her hand through her hair or something. And I'm like, there are too many frames of animation in that for TV. Yeah. This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. And it's just a constant thing. Fate Zero has your little, your big 3D sequences that Ufotable will do. But when they bring in the 3D camera in Fate Zero, it's sort of when you would expect it to happen. It's in your big action beats that you're going to need that for, like when, Kiritsugu and Kotomine fight in the final, or in the penultimate episode, right? You're going to have your big spinning camera there. They'll do it for much smaller things in Unlimited Blade Works. Like in episode 1, which is the second episode, when you meet Shirou and you go down to his basement where he's strengthening his little metal rod that he always plays with, his little pipe. They just do a big circling camera shot of that basement, of all the boxes, to give you a sense of his space and where he lives. It's not because you couldn't do that shot otherwise. It just feels like this is the moment when Ufotable says, well, what would be the ideal way in terms of cinematic vernacular to express this idea? And every time, we're gonna find a way to do it. And that feels like Unlimited Blade Works kind of like MO, which I think is something you've seen carried over into their future productions that we've already talked about. And it really is stunning to behold, because you get it in the action sequences, but just as much in the little slice of life stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I do think this is where Ufotable's style kind of fully comes into its own and kind of fully kind of congeals into very recognizably, this feels stylistically cogent precisely with, like, season 2 of Kimetsu no Yaiba, which came out last year, right? Like you could put these side by side, and I would say like the highest quality stuff from season 2 of Kimetsu no Yaiba still probably looks better than the highest quality stuff in Unlimited Blade Works, but in general, like the delta is not particularly notable. And we're recording these episodes during winter break, so I've been catching up on some like recent anime, like Chainsaw Man and stuff like that that's come out that's very big, and it has struck me watching some of that alongside with watching Unlimited Blade Works, how much Unlimited Blade Works could just come out right now and it would still be the best looking anime on TV. Like, it's been over 6 years now at this point, since the show came out. It's like 7-8 years. And it, like, absolutely, not only does it hold its own with the best TV productions happening right now, like, it's better than any, like, Chainsaw Man looks very nice. It doesn't look as good as Unlimited Blade Works. And it's, like, really crazy to me that the show can be as old as it is right now, relatively speaking, and it can look so good. Because particularly those first 2 episodes, episode 0 and episode 1, which I think showcase some of the best stuff in season 1 in terms of animation, as is often the case, your premieres do. It's like the fight between Archer and Lancer is fucking incredible, and Lancer and Saber also in episode 1. Like, the way they realize the action, the way the backgrounds work, the use of 3D, the use of not just like 3D backgrounds in a 3D camera, but like 3D elements in terms of particles and fog and smoke that they blend in with 2D fog and smoke elements. Like, all that stuff is so masterful that still other anime studios haven't like caught up to it yet. And it's pretty fucking crazy to watch it and just see how far ahead of the sort of, the cutting edge even ufotable has been for so long at this point.
Absolutely. I mean, because we're living in a world where that ufotable shaped, right? So obviously not every anime production is going for the ufotable effect, but for the ones that do, Chainsaw Man, I haven't seen Chainsaw Man yet, but I've seen other recent MAPPA productions like the recent season of Attack on Titan, Jujutsu Kaisen, stuff like that. MAPPA clearly is influenced by ufotable when you look at their recent work. And they're very good. MAPPA is one of the best, and Jujutsu Kaisen season 1 is one of the most handsome productions you'll see in recent years. Still, I would put it, probably a touch below, other than some of its peak moments. The season finale of Kaisen Season 1 is about as good as it gets. But, overall, you would say ufotable is ahead of the pack because they were innovating this and everyone else is still sort of playing catch-up. Not to put down anyone else's, talents or anything, obviously. But it's just, there is something so visionary and influential about it, which is why it's, we're having fun doing this season and why this season, even though, like, there's nothing, Fate Stay Night related coming out at the moment. It felt like something we wanted to do because just the ufotable influence is so pervasive. And starting with Kara no Kyokai and coming up to this point is a fun way to see that all come into its own. And I do think Unlimited Blade Works is just that moment where it clicks into place and you go, oh, everyone was chasing this after this point because just look at it. It's amazing. And you mentioned anything basically with Archer coming in and fighting is just like, how? It's this mix of like really detailed character animation because he is generally a 2D asset, but he's summoning in all these swords and he's moving in 3-dimensional space. And often when he's summoning things, you're going to have 3D effects and particles and all sorts of things. And it's absolutely mind-boggling. It is the kind of thing that you would look at, and if someone said, this is my favorite anime movie from 2015, you'd go, yeah, that came out in a theater. Of course that came out in a theater. It looks like it came out in a theater. It doesn't look like it aired on TV. And Fate Zero, obviously stupendous production, but Fate Zero, I can very clearly point you to this episode, they direct conversation this way because they're saving time and money for the big fight in the next one. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That is how animated productions work. It's much harder for me to pinpoint that, though, in Unlimited Blade Works. Like, where they are saving the money, I'm not so sure. They've become very good at hiding that wherever that is,
Yeah, I just think there's such a coherence to everything, which is what really puts it to that higher level. Yeah. And part of it is like it's hard to see the gaps. Like it's hard to identify where is the moment where it feels a little bit cheaper. Like other than like obviously the action scenes are clearly more expensive than the dialogue scenes, but the dialogue scenes don't typically feel like they have a bunch of corners cut in a way that you'd normally just kind of get used to with anime. But it's also it's the way they use 2D and 3D is just so advanced because like watching any modern, like, recent anime production where they use, lots of 3D elements, usually it feels like still you go from watching something that is primarily 2D, and then in the next shot, oh, now this is like a mainly a 3D thing. And you can just feel the difference immediately. You can tell it, like, puts you out. It's like if you're watching, a movie, like a giant monster movie or something. You have a bunch of characters driving in a car on a road, and then they have to jump out of the car because the monster's going to stomp on them. And then the next shot, it is a fake miniature road with a little toy model car. And it's like you can tell it's a toy model car and not the actual car anymore. And that's kind of like how the 2D, 3D split works. Like, this is very much a thing that Chainsaw Man has, which is not, like, Chainsaw Man looks very good. And it looks better than most other modern productions. But still, when it does the 2D, 3D stuff, you can feel the difference. Whereas with, like, Unlimited Blade Works, it never feels like, oh, this is the 3D shot, this is the 2D shot. All of them are both. Like, there's not a distinction there. It's just a natural blend. And then some of them will use more 3D, and some of them will be used more 2D, depending on what is needed. Like you're saying, the shot with Shirou in the hut or whatever, like, training, is not a shot that, like, needs to be 3D from a, like, conceptual point of view in terms of showing this thing, because it's not a conceptually, like, expensive thing to show. But thematically and cinematically, it has lots of advantages, and it's much more effective to use the 3D camera movement to sell the sense of space here. And so they'll use 3D more in that way for that shot, which is something that other studios normally I don't think would do. Partially because I think that integration of 2D and 3D, when it's not that seamless, it becomes a thing that you can't just blend so easily, or you can't just, like, transition naturally into the next shot. You have to be pre-vising all your 3D stuff way ahead of time because a whole different department is working on it. Whereas the thing with ufotable is all the 2D people and 3D people work in the same space together. And so they can very naturally blend all those elements. So when you get in some of those fight scenes, you're not thinking about, oh, now this character is a 3D character rather than a 2D character. This is, like, looks just like a 3D background or something. It becomes so seamless and fluid that you're never picking apart those elements. And that is, I think, the thing that more than anything else makes it still feel ahead of its time, even like 8 years later.
And, my argument here would be, I think it's not as much a, like, technological innovation. It's not that I think ufotable has access to better computers or whatever, It is more of a, how are they thinking of and conceiving it? And part of that is what you're talking about, of the animators just are literally in the space so they can collaborate much, much more closely. And I think that's a huge part of it. But I also think just the people at ufotable have an understanding of how you deploy space in a visual work like this. One idea that I've brought up before in our Kimetsu no Yaiba episodes, but just to recap it here, there's a scholar whose work I really like named Thomas Lamar. He wrote this book, The Animation, that has an idea in it that I find extremely useful, and I'm making use of in my own dissertation and whatnot, and kind of building on, where he kind of tries to define, like, a way of sort of how does animation, and anime in particular, but this is also to an extent true of American animation before, like, 2000, before we get into 3D CG, of that when you're drawing by hand and in the traditional way you would have it on an animation stand with the camera pointing down and you would layer the elements. Now this is done in a computer, but it's the same conceptual idea. You have this, what he calls the animetic view of the world, which is kind of like if imagine being on a train is the metaphor he uses, and you're looking out the window of the train, and you are not a participant in that action. You see it going out there. There is depth to it. There's very clear depth to it, but you have kind of this side view of the action. And that is, to a basic extent, what, most animation in the 2D sort of cell animation planar model looks like, where you are compositing layers for a sort of static, fixed view. The usual camera movements in anime are pans and tilts, because if you had an actual camera, those are the moves a stationary camera can make. It can pan left and right, and it can tilt up and down, but you typically will not unmount the camera and then move it in, because that's very hard to do in animation. And he contrasts this with the sort of cinematic view. If you're on a train, imagine you're at the front of that train kind of barreling into the space, and if you unmount a camera and you can move it around, that'll be sort of more of your movement. And that is what 3D CGI often embraces, because you have a literally unbound virtual camera in that space. And so a lot of anime in this, and this is exactly what you're talking about, Sean, they kind of move between these two tendencies. You'll be animatic most of the time, but then when you want a more cinematic shot, and again, cinematic not in the sense of like The Last of Us is a cinematic game, in the sense of like this sort of visual tendency of cinema, that's where you're going to unmount your camera, you're going to go into 3D CGI. And I think ufotable has synthesized these two, where they understand the sort of basic animatic view of the world very well, but I think they also have a really clear understanding of what visual conventions are offered by this alternate way of seeing that can be brought into an anime space. And so instead of kind of treating these as two modes that we alternate between, I think they've really found a way to synthesize them. And that, of course, close collaborations of the teams is a huge part of that. But I think it's a conceptualization thing more than anything else, anything technical, you know? And that's part of what makes it so masterful. And I think this show shows it off very heavily throughout.
Yeah, like it definitely feels like between Kata no Kyokai and Fate Zero, like we've seen them experimenting and like building up these techniques. And there's some things that are, some incredibly impressive sequences that use this in the Kata no Kyokai movies. You've got like everything with Berserker, which I still think is like an incredibly impressive realization of using 3D for a full character, but integrating him seamlessly into a primarily 2D show. Like that's still very impressive. But it's Unlimited Blade Works is where you get the same thing you see when you watch Kimetsu no Yaiba, where it just feels completely seamless. And it's here, I feel like they just have like fully perfected that style.
The other thing I want to mention, sorry.
Yeah.
No, the other thing I wanted to mention with the animation is the color work. The colors in Unlimited Blade Works look so good. Some of this is just, I think, they've made different coloring decisions. Fate Zero is a little more muted. Unlimited Blade Works is a little brighter. The colors are a little poppier. They have a little more a sense of kind of your sort of bolder poster paints kind of that you would have. But I also think there's I would have to imagine that they made some kind of change to their color systems between these two shows, because Fate Zero feels, and this would technologically probably be correct for a TV production in 2011, more like maybe an 8-bit color system before they'd fully upgrade, because 16-bit colors you start to get in movies in like the 2000s. But in TV shows, you're going to stay with probably the lower color palette. It feels like they have a much bigger color palette to play with in Unlimited Blade Works. And that's on display. Just, I think, on the level of color, this show is absolutely stunning. And, love the use of color in the other stuff. But you can just tell, like, because we're at the point now where colors are all done digitally, other than sometimes backgrounds, obviously, we'll still have hand-drawn colors. But you just do feel like, okay, the systems available to them, I think, are richer. And then, of course, their general color sensibilities are very strong. And I just very much like the palette of this show. It looks very pleasing all the time.
Yeah, and they're very much like, they're doing a very good job, I think, of bringing in a lot of the style of the visuals from the visual novel. Because particularly when you talk about color for this show, I always think of the shot that it's in episode 0 and episode 1, and they revisit the spot in episode 12, which is the rooftop, the skyscraper rooftop that Dean visits in episode 0 to like give Archer an overview of the city. You have this very kind of iconic background from the game, which is the skyline of Fuyuki, but kind of looked at from above. There's a big action scene in the Fate route between Saber and Ryder that take place on a skyscraper, I think primarily so they can use that background because it looks so fucking good. And it's a great action scene. But that city view where you have it's so richly like kind of the blacks and the blues of the city with then these like very like harsh red and yellow and orange lights that kind of break through that kind of blue kind of fog that is almost like some of the stuff you saw in the epilogue of Kata no Kyokai there with like the orangish light diffusing through the snow. Here it's like the atmospheric light of the city diffusing through the atmosphere, making it like glow kind of blue, which of course like is what happens. There's something about that color palette that is so Fate to me. Like it just so defines the look of Fate, which is like that kind of cold winter night in the city, or like, but more like not in the city. It's like on the outskirts of the city looking into the city. Like that's just so much of the aesthetic of the show. It's that, and then it's like the big bright red bridge is the other thing I always think about because it's like a key landmark in Fuyuki that you visit and all of the stuff set there. And yeah, like the richness of the colors, the diversity of the color palette, and the way it's implemented is so striking. And then, of course, this is also a show where I think Takeuchi's like character designs lean a lot more on using like kind of singular big bold colors to define characters, so it's like Archer and Rin are all both of them are defined by red and black, and so they're paired together color wise. Shirou and Saber are both blue and white, although they do give Shirou a cool jacket so that he's not only ever wearing his t-shirt that's like a white t-shirt with blue sleeves, which is his like singular look in the game. I guess that is student uniform. Here they give him like a cool yellow or like white leather jacket that he wears sometimes as well. But all the characters are kind of like themed around their general color palettes in a way that is almost a little bit more cartoonish and it's kind of more typical of Takeuchi's more early artwork rather than some of the character designs you saw in like Fate Zero that go for a more muted and maybe more realistic color palette. Here, the characters are very vibrant and they pop. Like Lancer is all kind of like blue, including his hair, except for his like bright red eyes and his big red spear. And so that kind of the way the characters are designed around their colors means I think you need to really push that color palette that way to make those character designs work the way they're intended to work.
Absolutely, because the key colors are very clearly, you've got these bold reds and bold blues, and they literally, are in the city with the red bridge and the blue, skylines and stuff. You've got, Tohsaka Rin, who is very red. You've got other characters who are very blue. You've got, Shirou's hair is red. You've got Shinji, is it Shinji at the school, who's like the bully asshole, Mato Shinji, who is, his hair is, a bright shade of blue. It's very fun, and I've really come to like Takeshi Takeuchi's character designs, and I think they do a great job of it here, in part because they let that color palette suffuse the entire show in a really fun way. Saber also gets to be quite a bit more blue with the outfits they give her here. She does not have her black business outfit from Fate Zero anymore. She has more of her like kind of schoolgirl with like the blue ribbon and stuff like that. But she's very good. She has good costumes. I don't know that it's like probably not something she had to worry about as King Arthur, but in the modern day, damn it, she's going to look good, and she's very good at it.
Yes. No. Yeah, let's actually get into talking about some of the stuff in like episode 0 and episode 1 and some of the characters. And just we're mentioning Saber. One thing I do want to mention that it's something that it's not, I think, actually an issue with Fate Zero, but it's something that has always bugged me personally, being someone who's come from Fate Stay Night, is Saber has always felt like really weak to me in Fate Zero, and it's always bugged me. And one thing I like about Unlimited Blade Works is, and it's not even just Saber, it's all of the servants, the way they realize the action in this show, and you get it like really prominently in episode 0 and episode 1, is how fucking dangerous the servants feel. Like they're very powerful in Fate Zero, particularly when they use their noble phantasms and stuff. But if you compare the fight between Saber and Lancer in Fate Zero versus her fight with Lancer here, it's like the overall kind of power level or whatever feels much more kind of vicious. That sense of that a normal human doesn't stand a chance, right? Which is one of the reasons why when you do have a human that is able to fight Saber in this season, it is like shocking. Of course, he's only able to do it because he has Caster's magic. But that sense of like, their blows are too fast for the human eye to be able to follow. Like they're truly horrifying. As a normal human standing next to a servant that's like going into battle is a thing that should just make you like basically shit your pants, is how they're described in the visual novel. And the action scenes of the visual novel, they obviously don't see, but like you've played Mahou Sky no Yoda Johnson, so you have some context for the way that Type Moon visual novels do action. And it's like very visceral, the way they use sound effects, the way they will use their visuals. Mahou Sky no Yoda is more advanced than the original Fate Stay Night is, but they're really smart about how they use all of that. And then the language of Nasu's prose that's really good at communicating the sort of like dangerous energy where it feels like anybody could get killed at any second in one of these fights, because, they're fighting with magic and like deadly weapons and stuff like that. And that's something that I think the action Unlimited Blade Works communicates so powerfully. And again, you get it right off the bat in episode 0 and episode 1, but also Saber in particular is a fucking monster in this show. Like she feels like you need to have like a true trump card up your sleeve, like Assassin has, or like, Berserker, which is just a giant monster at some point. And even then Saber like basically beats Berserker in that one-on-one duel. It's just that Berserker is able to resurrect himself through a noble phantasm, the details of which we don't know all about yet. But I've always felt that in Fate Zero, like Saber feels a little bit too underpowered or something, where she's supposed to be one of, if not the most powerful servant around outside of maybe Gilgamesh, and you need to compromise her to have other servants have a fighting chance. So like Shirou is not able to give her a proper mana supply and stuff like that, which is one of the reasons why other servants are able to fight her. Because if she was full powered, it feels like she should be able to like basically bowl through most of their servants. And I've always loved that about the show, how well they get that across with her.
Well, this is something that's been very interesting, having been reading Mahotsukai no Yoru as I'm going through all of this, and getting a sense of Nasu's style of action does tend to go for this, and this is true in Kara no Kyokai also. It's always pushing into the realm of, this is a little bit beyond our perception, you know? And this is a thing that you can do really well in novel form and in visual novel form, where even in a visual novel, a lot of it is left to the reader's imagination, right? It's a lot of like, you know, suggestion of things, and then your mind fills in the impossible details of what's going on. If you have not read Mahotsukai no Yoru yet, and you get started, and it's a little slow at the beginning, wait until chapter 5, and you'll know what we're talking about, because it gets bonkers. And that to me is like the version of that scene, just because it is so over the top, and like the delta between what was going on in chapter 4 versus what you get to chapter 5 is just this massive delta. But you see that kind of thing in all of this work. And Fate Zero, I think some of that is the kind of story Zero is telling. Some of it I think is Urabuchi Gen must just have different sensibilities as a writer, because that one is much more sort of gritty, down to earth. It's action that is a little more sort of visceral and explicable, because, you know, your main character there is Kiritsugu, who is shooting people, right? Like, it's just something that we understand a little more. There are fantastical sequences, but even then, the, like, crazy power stuff tends to be the noble phantasms, which are a little easier to conceptualize, because those are the finishing moves. Those are the big pieces of magic, you know? And I think that works great for Fate Zero. But definitely in Fate Stay Night, there are scenes where ufotable, just going back and forth between Mahotsukai no Yoru and this, makes me very excited for ufotable doing a Mahotsukai no Yoru movie, because they're going to get to do those scenes, and they are, you know, because it is tough, because when you go into anime, I think the things, and this must be, I think, maybe the difficulty that other studios probably had adapting his writing before ufotable came along, is that some of the things that make that writing so visceral and suggestive is hard to do in a medium where it's all visuals and sound, and it's not leaving things up to your imagination so much, right? Mm-hmm. But I think they've found really good ways to translate it. And definitely Unlimited Blade Works just is constantly doing that. And I think you're right. Like Saber, the moment she comes out and is fighting Lancer, or is fighting Archer, the Archer fight is shorter, but you have the fight with Lancer, you have the fight with Berserker, just all the craziness of those first couple episodes, you do get an immediate sense of, oh, she's strong on a level we can't quite comprehend. Some of that also is an issue of POV, right? Here we are with Shinji, who literally cannot comprehend this because he doesn't know about any of this, whereas in Fate Zero, everybody knows about this world and are prepared for, you know, Kiritsugu, again, as our main character, literally has like contingencies for everything. So that's part of why I think the power feels different. But yes, it is. We're definitely more in the vein of these are places mere mortals should not tread, because these are levels of power that at a certain point escape our human faculties to comprehend or describe them.
Yeah, and you get the first big action scene in episode 0 where Lancer comes in because Tohsaka is investigating the school. He shows up. And then attacks them. You know, there's that great shot where Tohsaka like jumps off the roof, and then Archer materializes partway through and grabs her and like, you know, handles the landing as she asks him to. And then she asks Archer to like, hey, show me what you can do. And then he like, you know, like sharpens his gaze, and then he just like disappears. And then you see Lancer like get into a sort of defensive position, and then they engage. And at that point, it's just this like insane flurry of blows that are like, you can just barely perceive what's happening but like you can perceive it enough that you can tell that it's not just, they're not faking the action or anything. It's just that they're drawing a shit ton of frames and being like very intentional with how they're portraying it. So it doesn't feel like it's just nonsense you're looking at, but it does communicate that, oh, Archer and Lancer, what they are doing is something where it's like, I don't care how good you are as a human mage or a human martial artist or whatever, without something like caster's enhancements or something, like, you just don't stand a chance. And of course, that's what happens to Shirou, is he gets hunted down by Lancer, gets impaled, then when he encounters Lancer again, Lancer's like toying with him and just trying to see like, hey, what can you do, boy? Like, how the fuck did you survive when I stabbed you in the heart before? And it's only because Lancer's not taking Shirou seriously that he's able to get to the point where he can summon Saber. And that sense of like really palpable danger, just at like them standing there. I'm just always so impressed with this show, how perfectly they capture that feeling from the visual novel.
Yeah, it's really cool. And even when it's not the servants, there are a couple of sequences with masters doing magic, particularly Tohsaka. And I love Nasu's entire conception of magic. It's much more sort of suggested in Kara no Kyokai than it is seen, because our main sort of down-to-earth characters are not mages in that show. They're, I don't know what you would call Shiki. She's not a mage. She does have magic powers, but it's a different kind of thing, you know. But here you have full-on, we're activating our magical circuits. We've got the crest on our arms. I'm firing my gander bullets, all of that stuff. And it looks super cool. And it's so... I love the entire conception of magic. I love how weird it is. I love how it's like tied into like literally like your bodily physiology and stuff like that. It's very, very neat. And they do. There's really the one big episode where Tohsaka tries to kill Shirou. Sorry. And I don't think she's really trying to kill him. I think she's toying with him. But they have their fight. And even some of the magic like Shirou is doing is cool. It's basic, but he's like taking a fucking like rolled up poster and like, you know, making it firm, and then he's fighting with it, and he fights. That's how he fights Lancer. He doesn't, obviously he would not be able to beat Lancer like that, but it's cool that he tries it, and he like does fend off a blow or two. So just all of that stuff is great.
Yeah, I love that moment where, there's Fujine gave him this like poster she got when at some like restaurant freebie or something that she doesn't want. It's basically garbage, so she just gives it to him, and he's like, what the hell? And then then later when after he's been killed, comes back to life, stumbles back home, Lancer shows up, and then he gets the poster and uses it to sort of like kind of avoid a blow, so that just like stabs him in the arm instead of just kills him, and then he runs into the hut or whatever, and then that's when he like spreads it out and uses that as a shield. That's a very cool moment. That's like that's exactly what happens in the visual novel, of course, but it is like conceptually it is a cool way to realize his powers. And the idea, that we're starting to get introduced here, that Shirou's magic fundamentally isn't the strengthening magic that he's been using for most of the season. It's projection magic, and that for every time he tried to project things before, he only projected hollow objects, and now that he's becoming more advanced as a mage, he's able to actually like project the same kinds of swords that he sees Archer use. And so that idea that strengthening is one piece of what his real magic is, which is summoning these like things from his mind, which is cool. Of course, we'll get more of that and what that is in season 2, but you see that, as you say, like the concept of the way that magic works in the Nasu verse, which we haven't really seen much prominently in what we've watched so far, because it's in the background in Kara no Kyokai. And then also you see more magic happens in Fate Zero, but not in a way that like, it's not Nasu's language. It's not explaining it to you in that way. And that our main characters, while they are mages, like Kiritsugu is a mage because he can use magic, but he's not a part of like mage society in any way. And so this is the first time with something we've watched that really is kind of getting into what is this magic and how does it work and what are the rules of the magic. And that will become important in the rest of Unlimited Blade Works. And it's also important in terms of like Heaven's Feel and that stuff as well. Like, what is magic? What is like magecraft versus true magic, which is stuff that Mahotsukai no Yoda also gets into. All that world of magic is very important to what's happening in Fate Stay Night.
It really shines a light on how lazy the magic in Harry Potter is. Just to say, a contemporary work to Fate Stay Night of let's grab a wooden stick as a wand and we'll say nonsense words that are meant to sound like Latin and things will happen, versus I've got magical circuits in my body and I'm using my Gander spells and I've got familiars and hey, here's this Robin I found that talks, and it's just all sorts of crazy things in these shows. I love it.
And just the idea of like, that mages pass down their magical crest from generation to generation, right? This is like one of the main things that separates Shirou and Tohsaka. And there's that big scene where she's talking to him, and she kind of explains a little bit about what his history is with magic, and she realizes that Kiritsugu, like his relationship with Kiritsugu, is completely different than her relationship with her father was like. And she says, that Kiritsugu, she will never recognize him as a mage because he chose to be a father above being a mage. One of the things is that Kiritsugu didn't pass down the Emiya magic crest to Shirou, so he can't use the time magic that Kiritsugu could use, which is what he inherited from his father, right? His father was doing all the eternity stuff. That's all the same kind of magic. Tohsaka uses gem magic. That's what her father used. That's what her family uses. So that crest is passed down from one master to one apprentice, like physically passed down to them, like into their bodies. It's also why Sakura can't inherit it. It can only be passed down from one person to the next. And for each generation, whatever like they learn and the progress they make is sort of engraved into that magic crest, and then is eventually passed down onto the next person. But that is one of those things that makes magic society in this world so like exclusive, and like that kind of pit of vipers thing that's going on there is because it's like it's so insular, and that accumulation of knowledge through generations, and the kind of inhuman way that then makes you think about yourself and your sort of descendants, which Shirou has been spared from all of that. Kiritsugu has broken that cycle, and so Shirou is an amateur mage. He doesn't know how to do magic kind of at all. He's making very fundamental mistakes in how all this shit works, but it means that he is like finding his own path as a magic user, whereas like Tohsaka has had her entire life laid out before her. And in many ways, like if Tokiomi had not died, she probably would be the kind of person who would have fucking murdered Shirou without a second thought at the beginning of this show. It's probably only because Tokiomi wasn't there to keep me on that mage path as narrowly as we see most mages be, that has allowed her to be as kind of like human and compassionate as she actually is, because she is kind of a little bit escaped that world in her own way.
Yeah, very lucky for her that Kotomine Kire decided to be a hands-off godparent and just kind of leave her to her own devices, because I could imagine a different path where Kotomine decided, I'm going to take this girl under my wing, and she would be a maniac serial killer. But no, there's that line that Reen has that you mentioned, and I wrote it down in my notes, because she says it disdainfully. She says, he put being a father ahead of being a mage. And what I wrote down is like, that's great. Kiritsugu really learned his lesson. Like, he actually did learn the lessons of the tragedy of Fate Zero, and it's there in the essence of who Shirou is as a character, is that Kiritsugu did pass something on, and he passed on like the humanity he learned from this horrible tragedy, right? He gave Shirou a fighting chance at a real human life because of that, right? And also, of course, whatever magic Shirou is going to come up with is going to be his own and is going to be something cool and new. Because the other thing is, if you're always constantly passing down your crest, you're not actually truly innovating as a mage, right? Like, you're kind of always building off what came before. And it feels like with the projection magic, Shirou is on a path to doing something different, which is fun, and I'm excited to see. There's like real mystery around it, you know?
Yes, yeah. And as you say, just the way that all the magic stuff works is so exciting and interesting, because it is a very unique like world view or whatever, like, setting that Nasu has built. And it's fun that all of the stuff takes place in that world, but some of it focuses more on the magic than others. So it's like, now, Jonathan, if you go back and rewatch Kata no Kyokai with all of your understanding of the world of magic and the Natsu stuff, there's lots of things in those movies that are just passing references of like weird like lingo and stuff like that. That is all stuff that will make sense now, because these other things, Mahotsukai no Yoru and Fates Day Night deal with it very directly. And so it's such a cool idea for a setting that then builds across these multiple works that are mostly disconnected, but have these similar common points in setting.
Well, it's part of what's interesting about Hinoko Nasu, because a lot of his most famous works are done in this kind of flurry of writing in this like 10-year period, basically 95-ish to like 2005-ish. But it's because the first two big things he writes, Garden of Sinners and Mahotsukai no Yoru don't come out immediately. And so then he's doing Tsukihime and Fate's Day Night and kind of recircling around these ideas. And then, Mahotsukai no Yoru comes out way later. Garden of Sinners starts to trickle out unofficially and then through, officially, but not through like a major press at like Comic-Cets. And then it comes out through an official press. So it is this interesting body of works that are all kind of in the same place, exploring the same ideas, but they all wind up coming at it from a slightly different angle. It's a very fascinating, I think, oeuvre, however you want to say the French word, because of that.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of these characters, Sean, because they're great. And like Fate Zero, this one has an insanely stacked voice cast. Part of that, again, is what we've talked about before, because the one thing apparently that Studio Dean show from 2006 did really well is it had apparently the most prescient casting director of all time. Because they just got all these people who, like, for instance, the one in this show that it cracks me up is Shinji, is Hiroshi Kamiya. I don't think in 2015, if you were casting this part, you would have gotten... Not that you wouldn't want to, I just don't think you couldn't have gotten Hiroshi Kamiya for this part in 2015, but they got him for it in 2006, and then of course he's just grandfathered into it, and it's the same effect as Fate Zero, where just up and down, you're just like, is this fairly minor character that well-known actor? Yes, it is, and it's a great cast top to bottom, with our sort of main four leads of Shirou, Saber, Rin, and Archer all being great. Of course, we know Saber from Fate Zero, but Junichi Suwabe as Archer, maybe my favorite performance in this show. He's so good. Kana Ueda, who we heard a little bit as Chibi Rin in the last one, she's phenomenal. Another actress, again, what prescience to get Kana Ueda when they got Kana Ueda, and then she grows up with this role. Noriaki Sugiyama as Shirou, just perfect, and I think the range he shows as an actor, it's just such a phenomenal lead cast. And then of course you go down the list, and it's just kind of A-listers all the way down.
Yeah, it's an amazing cast. I do want to zoom in on Noriaki Sugiyama, because he also, the other really big role, and his most famous role is definitely Sasuke from Naruto, which he was doing at the same time as this when he was originally cast. So it's kind of similarly these two roles, but they're such opposite fucking characters. They could not be more different people, Shirou and Sasuke. Shirou, whose only desire is to help people, and has no desire of his own, and then Sasuke, who's driven so powerfully by revenge that he casts off everything good that has ever been in his life. And it's funny to me how opposite these two characters are. The thing that's I love about Sugiyama's performance as Shirou, is that every time he comes back to this character, he gets better at it. Because he's obviously great in the original visual novel, but also partially because a visual novel, I think the nature of that project and how much voice acting there is, and that you're isolated, so you're not working off of other people. Voice acting visual novels tends to be a little bit more low key than when you get the equivalent performance in the anime, where it's only usually the really big scenes. It's a much more focused body of work. And you're able to do the performance in the room with your kind of other cast members. But every time he's come back to the role, which with this kind of role you do every couple of years in a game, or they make a new movie adaptation or whatever, he just gets better and better. And his performance here is incredible. I think the range he gives Shirou of both that sort of quiet, gentle sweetness that is really inherent to the character. You can see why everybody likes him so much, because he is just such a fundamentally likable, good boy but you also, I think everybody sees that there's something loneliness or something deep in him, and so all these characters kind of want to care for him, right? It's Tohsaka just can't leave him alone because there's something wrong with him. There's a lost puppy kind of quality to Shirou that once you identify it, you just can't let him be. But there's also a ferociousness to the character that Sugiyama gets across in the action scenes, where he's that kind of stubborn side of the character, like in the episode 12, where he turns down Castor's offer, and without even considering it, he doesn't waver at all. And there's this fierceness to the character when he has decided to do something, that Sugiyama goes more into that kind of Sasuke place of his voice and gives that very strong performance. And yeah, I think it's incredibly striking how good he is in this show.
He's phenomenal. and I hadn't even made the connection. Obviously, I've seen less Naruto than you have, but I did not make the connection that he also played Boruto's dad's best frenemy, Sasuke.
Yes.
As we now refer to him, Uncle Sasuke. I don't know if that's actually the relationship in Boruto. In my head, I've written this story where Sasuke comes in every half season and gives him a present or something. Probably not the case. But
Sasuke is like his dad's best friend that like his Boruto kind of loves his dad, right? He loves his dad, but his dad's like the president basically, and so he can't go to any of Boruto's baseball games. But like Sasuke is like the cool drifter who comes into town. The Boruto gets like to learn cool ninja shit from him. That's basically the relationship.
Okay, that's cool. Do they actually have baseball games in Boruto? Because that sounds great.
No, they have they might. I don't know. I've only watched like the first 40 or something episodes of that several years ago. They didn't at that point. It's more. There's a big ninja tournament. Is one of the big things in Naruto.
I see.
Fucks up with his relationship with Boruto around that shit.
Well, we'll get to that next season when we do our Naruto Next Generation season of Japanimation Station, where the gimmick is...
The only thing we watch is Boruto, but not Naruto, which
yes,
would be
exactly.
That's the stupidest but best podcast ever.
That's the joke. Anyway, but Sugiyama, fantastic. There is that sweetness and that kindness as you talk about. There's this also aloofness that episode 12 really narrows in on with the date he has with Rin, where... I think he is sincerely like grateful to her and like enjoys her company, but he doesn't feel it the way she expects him to feel it. And he is just genuinely a little aloof. When she says, did you have a good day? And he's like, well, this is really nice what you did for... He's almost describing it in an intellectual sense. Like, this is a nice series of things you did for me today. And she's just like, you're just fucking something wrong with you, kid. Like, she's really... Because she has her feelings on her sleeves at all time, basically. Even when she's trying to hide them. I think it's kind of funny. You know, Tohsaka... Literally, if you Google... Because I did this yesterday. If you Google the word tsundere, she is the picture that comes up. She's on the Wiktionary page for tsundere. But, like, you know, the dictionary definition is cold, nitpicky character, usually a girl who conceals, without complete success, a bashfulness in the presence of their crush. She really does not conceal it well. She is like, of the tsundere archetypes, she's, you know, it really, the weight is on the, she's not actually as good as at performing the cold exterior as she thinks she is. But anyway, and I think part of that is because she's opposite Shirou, who just brings this out of her because he doesn't seem to be in his feelings in the same way. But you have that, and I think he's great at that. And then, as you said, the moment when he confronts Castor at the end of the season finale, there is like a firmness and a fierceness and a weight to his voice that, like, it took me aback. It, like, takes your breath away of, like, this voice, because it's clearly the same person. It's not like suddenly they brought in another actor, but there's a transformation that happens there that is really stark and interesting. And I think that journey Sugiyama goes on in these 13/16 episodes is fascinating, and it's just so fun to watch, and obviously a great voice actor and a great lead performance.
Yeah, and I think like one of the key things with playing Shirou that I think is different than like Kokuto or Sojiro, as the other Sojiro being the Mahosuke no Yoda character, that are cut from the same cloth, is that I think Shirou needs to be seemingly more normal than he actually is. I think Kokuto and Sojiro are meant to be pretty disarming pretty early on. You're like meant to be like, what the fuck is wrong with this dude? Like, why is this guy so willing to just like, you know, take the side of this woman who almost certainly is a serial killer based on what he's seen? Then Sojiro has his whole own deal. Whereas like Shirou, like most of his reactions early on are pretty reasonable, and certainly within the realm of the protagonist character that you understand must be like a little bit more exaggerated. He has to be a little bit more, I'm fighting on the side of justice and friendship and that kind of stuff. Like, I think the first few episodes, you're not necessarily meant to, unless you know to look for it, to key in on some of the things that show him as being like a little bit more kind of fucked up than you expect the character to be. And so I think that's one of the other tricks that Sugiyama is able to play very effectively. And it's one of the key things from the visual novel, right? In the visual novel, you're in Shirou's head, so it's very hard to take that objective stance and to identify how messed up he is. And you can really get through most of the Fate route without fully seeing it. And Unlimited Blade Works, part of the story is really like putting a lens on that and trying to dig through this character, figure out what is this kid's deal and why is his pursuit of sort of like single-minded justice in this idealistic way, not like justice as like a, like eye for an eye kind of thing, but this like, I want to make everybody in the world happy and like perfect and have a happily ever after for everybody. This very childish fantasy version of being a hero. Like, what is it about that makes him kind of inhuman? And you need to have that journey be one where you're not expecting that to be to be this character's deal. And as characters start pointing it out for Shirou, that's when you're meant to start seeing it as well, right? So you have like that really key scene with, I think her name is Mitsuzuri, the captain of the archery club, where she says to him, "You never smile," and she's like, I think doesn't fully realize how much that is cutting to the core of who he is, because she's saying like, you never laughed at my jokes and all that stuff. So what she goes on to say, but when she says, "Hey, you never smile," he gets a flash to the fire and he gets a look on his face that's like, oh shit, like someone has found me out. Like it's not like he's never realized that he doesn't smile. It's that somebody knows that this is what I am. And then eventually he realized like it's, she's not accusing him of anything, and he's able to laugh it off with her. But it's those moments, I think, that both he's able to play well, and then the character animators, the directors, and everybody is able to get to at the heart of this character, that sense of that he's trying to hide all these things about himself because he doesn't want anybody to know how empty he is inside, because I think deep down he kind of knows who and what he is kind of wrong, or it's like, it's inhuman. It's not normal. It's far from normal, and he doesn't want anyone to know that about him.
Well, part of that is just in the character design Takeuchi gives him, right? Because Kokuto is a much more, like, he's often dressed in black, and he's a much plainer looking character. Like what with the Kokuto, he's like aggressively normal looking. He does not look like he would be the protagonist of your anime because he's not special enough, right? Shiki looks cool. Shiki's got the fucking kimono and red coat, right? If you read Witch on the Holy Night, Sojiro is very normal looking, except for he's got this wrap around his neck, and he always looks like a deer in the headlights. He's got these hilarious big eyes that are always kind of looking at, because he doesn't understand the world for very specific reasons. But it's very kind of funny. And then here, Shirou looks the part of your anime hero. He's got cool red, orange hair, and I think he's got like a lot of, expressions, and his costume generally looks, not like cool in like a superhero way, but looks like he could be your anime hero, right? And then he is different than that, and I think that's what's so interesting and fun, or part of what's so interesting and fun about the animation of the character. Can we talk about this? There's this scene, this is like episode 8 or 9. I don't remember the exact episode, but it's the one that ends with Archer having this big confrontation with Shirou. This is after I think Archer has tried to kill him, because one thing I want to try to talk through is how many times does Shirou suffer a seemingly mortal blow in season 1 of Unlimited Blade Works, because there's a lot. But there's this scene where he's talking to Rin alone, and she's trying to get to his deal, and he says, I think the closest he comes to like honestly opening up, he says, "I guess I feel like I don't have the right to ask for more than I've been given already." And this is the point where Archer steps in and sort of starts taking over. And also you have Rin confronting him here as well, because Rin is the one who says, you're always worrying about yourself, but never focusing on, or you're worrying about others, but never focusing on yourself. And she makes this comparison between him and Archer. And then Archer comes in and has the whole speech about how one must have a reason for fighting, but that reason must never be an ideal. This is the most Kinoko Nasu speech ever written. If you fight for an ideal, you can only save ideals, and that means you can't help others. All reasons to fight involve saving something, or at the very least, yours does. Is that right, Emiya Shirou? But salvation by the hands of another is not salvation. At this point, they are showing on screen the fire in Fuyuki City from the end of Fate Zero. Such salvation is like money. When used, it passes into another's hands. It's true that you can probably achieve your desire to save others, but you have no desire to save yourself. You will repeat the cycle until you die, still clinging to ideals that are not your own. That is why your ideals are meaningless. Nothing comes of helping others. In the end, you can save neither others nor yourself. A lie of a life. That almost feels like if you took the mystical version of Shiki from the epilogue of Kara no Kyokai and had her angrily confronting, Kokuto with this. That's the kind of speech you have. But what makes Ufotable so great and takes it to the next level is that, of course, you have your ending theme by Kalafina at the end of every one of these, right? And it's great. And I had to, as I was taking notes on this, I had to start writing down the lyrics, because you get through that speech and then you get, Shirou has no rejoinder to it. He doesn't really know how to respond to Archer. But then you get the end theme. And the lyrics of the end song: "We didn't understand anything. My left hand groped for things that vanished to my touch. A moral conflict stays your hand and tricks you out of your future. I don't know how to protect anyone, and my ideals might well be pointless, but I want to live my life. But I want to live my life. The past repeats before my eyes. Here I will trust the me that stands now with you until my dream crumbles and withers. I hope you will carve out paradise with me. Fight your fate." Wow, they're really good at this, Sean, where you have been seeing this song at the end of every episode, and then you realize, for me at least in this one, after Archer's confrontation, that song is Shirou's rejoinder to some degree. Like, that song is coming from within him. In the same way that, like, when you watch the Demon Slayer movie, Mugen Train, and you get to Homura at the end of that, and you realize, oh, that's Rengoku. This is him. You know, this is something from his soul. And that's just a level of, like, you know, putting together all the pieces of the puzzle that is a production into a way that is more than the sum of its parts that ufotable is so majestic at, and kind of blew me away.
Yeah, it's like they continue to be the best at business at using their opening and ending themes and stuff, and their end credits themes for, like, narrative purpose in integrating the music into the show and all that kind of stuff. Because Kazuya Yuki didn't do the main soundtrack for this. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but she did, obviously. They use some of the Fate Zero themes. They do remixes of, reinterpretations of for some spots. And then she, through Calfina, did work on the show. This was also, like, when she was doing fucking, like, 500 Sword Art Online soundtracks for the games and the shows and the movies and all that kind of shit. So it's like, you know, it's not surprising that she wasn't here to do the main music. But yes, that Calafina song is amazing. That ending is amazing. That episode is one of those key ones for getting at the heart of some of the things that, like, the gaps in Shirou's convictions, right? That he has this ideal he's striving for, but it is, as Archer points out to him, it's like, it's not something that he has sort of, like, come up with himself. It's something that has been passed to him by Kiritsugu, and it's like, and you're just, like, passing it on to other people. But, like, I think his point about, like, you can't bring other people salvation with, like, was Shirou truly saved? Or was, you know, like, his life was saved, but did he achieve salvation through the hands of Kiritsugu? No. Like, Kiritsugu received salvation through Shirou, right?
Right.
Like, that's why Shirou has this dream of, and, like, why he is part of why the reason he's taken on this ideal is that he saw, like, the incredible overflowing joy that Kiritsugu felt at being able to save Shirou's life that we saw at the end of Fate Zero. That's, like, one of the main things that drives him, is he saw that look on this man's face, and has been chasing that ever since. But as Archer says, it's like, it's kind of a lie. It's not something that you have found for yourself. You're never going to, because you don't understand it, you're never going to have that joy that Kiritsugu had, because you don't understand joy. You don't know what it is to save something for yourself. The way that Kiritsugu didn't save you for purely selfless reasons. There was, like, a selfish need that he needed to save other people in order for himself to be saved. But Shirou doesn't seemingly have that, because Shirou doesn't understand it. That hollowness or that aloofness deep inside of him is some kind of wall that is preventing this from being a genuine desire he has. And it's why his ideals are so far, like, from Archer's perspective, they're just, like, distant ideals, and they will never be able to be the thing that Shirou wants them to be. And I think it's a very powerful moment where Archer just, you know, really takes Shirou to task for all the things that he's been kind of floundering about for the first season.
Yeah, and I think zeroing in on that speech in particular, as I said, it's such a Kinoko Nasu-ass speech. You know, it's got that Toko Aozaki quality of, like, coldly logicking your way through this analysis in a way that the more I read of Kinoko Nasu's stuff, the more I realize his real self-insert character is not any of the boy protagonists. It's Toko from Kara no Kyokai. I feel like that must be the person he relates to the most, because so many of his characters wind up talking like Toko in key moments that are important. And Toko just talks talks like that all the time, which is what makes her so wonderful.
Yep.
But no, and I think it's a great moment. I think the idea, because it's provocative, it's one of those pieces of logic. This is the Kinoko Nasu effect, where it's a piece of logic that when you go through it, it's kind of unassailable, but it's counterintuitive. The idea of fighting for ideals is good. We all, I think, believe that, right? But he's saying, and Archer isn't really saying fighting for ideals is bad, but he's saying ideals alone are not something you can actually fight for because they're completely, if you just have your ideal and you haven't connected it to anything, like Shirou wants to be a hero, he wants to fight for people, but he has no wish to make on the Grail, he has no larger goal other than, his main way he's been a hero so far in his life is kind of being a fucking mop for the rest of the school, fixing all their heaters and stuff, right? Like, frankly, he's being taken advantage of by a lot of people. We see that with the student council president, who is nice, but I don't know if he really views Shirou as a friend or as someone who's good at fixing stuff, and is kind of nice to have lunch with because he's kind of a doormat.
Yeah, and you have that really key scene in episode 1 with Shinji that sets this up, where, you see that, Shido's, helping people out is, a weird fixation for him, because clearly Shinji is just manipulating him. Shinji's not, disguising the fact that he's manipulating him into staying after school to clean the archery dojo, which is, of course, what leads Shido ultimately to getting fucking impaled by Lancer. Shinji is, flagrantly abusing everything about this so-called friendship or relationship or whatever he has with Shirou. When that encounter started with Shirou confronting him because he suspects that Shinji is beating his sister. And clearly he has in the past, because Shirou's in that conversation he has with Sakura, it's clear that this is not the first time mysterious bruises have shown up on her body and that Shinji was to blame for it. But as soon as somebody asked him for help, he just concedes to it. And it is exactly the thing that Archer is talking about, is this all you're doing is floundering your way through life trying to vaguely help people, but that's not doing anything. And maybe if you get more power, you will be able to do that to larger extents, but you're never going to be this hero. You're never going to save people. And that and we've seen with Kiritsugu, that path can be very dangerous eventually. If you're pursuing that too far, eventually you start seeing other people as boundaries to your ability to save or help others, and then you start killing people. And we've seen the end of that path with Kiritsugu and Fate Zero. So all that is some that heart of Shido's character and this kind of wayward quality he has, where he wants to be this hero of justice, the Seigi no Mikata, but he has no idea how to do it, and he is going about it in a kind of psychopathic or sociopathic manner to the detriment of himself and ultimately probably to the people around him. Yeah.
It's really interesting stuff. But we'll have plenty more to say about Shirou probably next week. Can we talk about Tohsaka Rin, who is just apparently the tsundere to end all tsunderes? If you just Google the word again, that's the image that comes up everywhere. It's hilarious. She's wonderful. Kana Ueda, what a performance. Just such a delightful character in a way that, again, I'm coming from Fate Zero. I only knew her as the cute little girl who saved all the kids from the serial killer, which was indeed cool, but I did not expect her to be as fun and interesting a character in the way that, Kinoko Nasu often does with these, where you kind of start with a type and you peel back the layers over time, and she's just such a fun protagonist who's so interesting to follow.
Yeah, now you know why I was so excited when Emiya was announced for Genshin Impact and Ueda Kana was cast as her. Of course, this is a role where she is using her kind of Tokyo or
normal
sort of standard Japanese dialect. She also is originally from the Kansai region, so she plays lots of characters with the Kansai dialect like Emiya. But yes, Tohsaka is just an amazing character. She is definitely she kind of embodies some of that kind of tsundere thing. In fact, there's so much to the extent where in FGO, when they brought the Tohsaka character spiritually to that game, it's not literally her, but they kind of use characters from their popular series as frameworks for characters in FGO. They made two characters, Ishtar and Ereshkigal, that one of them, Ishtar, is the Tsun side of the tsundere, the prickly side, and Ereshkigal is the dere side. And it's one of the most genius things about Fate Grand Order is that they kind of like take that thing and separate out the characters and the sort of two sides of the personality. But yeah, she's this girl who, you know, is trying to be a mage in the way that we have seen, right, with like her father. She wants to be that kind of like austere. I'm pursuing magic and power for like its own sake. She never says anything about wanting to reach the root, but you know, she explains to Archer she's fighting the Holy Grail War because there's a fight to be had, which is the fucking coolest reason. You know, it makes no sense. It's incredibly dumb, but man, is it a fucking cool ass thing to say. It's like there's a fight there, and so I will fight it.
It's Goku logic. It's big Son Goku logic.
Yeah, but, you know, it's like she's fighting for, like, her family's honor and for herself as, like, you know, she wants to live up to all of those things. But we also see that she's far too, like, warm and compassionate and decent a person to actually be a mage. You know, like, we saw fucking Tokiomi in Fate Zero in the fucked up shit he was saying about Rin and Sakura and all that stuff. And passing it down, and that, you know, it doesn't matter, like his life doesn't matter, their lives don't matter, as long as eventually a descendant of the Tohsaka line reaches the root, then nothing else matters. And it's like, you know, what a monster her father actually was, but all mages like that are in this world. And she's like too decent of a person, you know, and she uses her most powerful gem, that like amulet she has, to save Shiro's life. And that's like kind of the secret that she keeps for the whole show. Because I love that Shirou, when he discovers it, he has this great line where he says, like, your Tohsaka's always going on about how she doesn't want to owe anybody anything. And that's her excuse for why she's helping Shirou, is she doesn't want to owe anyone anything. She hates being in other people's debts. But like, in a matter of fact, like, Shirou owes her like a debt that couldn't ever possibly be repaid. And she doesn't want to owe other people anything, but she doesn't mind if other people owe her stuff. She's never going to come to call on the debts that people owe her. I think that's like kind of gets to the heart of who she is as a person. And it's what makes her like so very human, much more human than Shirou is, but also like very heroic and very good and kind compared to a lot of the other people we have seen in this world.
This is definitely, I think, the character where this is the most interesting part of reading Witch on the Holy Night and watching Unlimited Blade Works at the same time, is that it's one of the clearest one-to-one connections of Tohsaka Rin being kind of a reworking of Aoko Aozaki from Witch on the Holy Night. There's a very clear similarity between down to their character design a little bit, actually, with like kind of the reds in their character design, but that they are mages. Aoko is a little newer to it than Rin is, but they are both sort of having in this story their first experience with like actually doing the mage shit and finding that it's not really for them and their disposition, you know? And I think Rin, that gap is even bigger because she's lived with this her whole life. But of course, at the first opportunity of, oh, what mages are supposed to do here is hunt down and kill this kid, instead, she uses her most powerful gem to save his life, right? So like there's the delta there is just very big. She even says in her head at one point, I think it's in episode 0, where she's saying like, you know, I know what mages are supposed to do is like kill outsiders, but that's why I'm really careful not to let anyone find me, because I don't want to kill anyone. And of course, you know that like actual mages dyed in the wool in this stuff have had that drummed out of them, you know? And it's really, I think she's just such an interesting character because of that, because she does have this exterior, but it is so clearly an act. It is so clearly a facade to be cold when like her favorite thing about the Holy Grail War is getting to hang out with Shirou and Saber and having fun with her friends, basically, right? Like she's in a very like extroverted person, actually, and that's kind of, I feel like, what you're learning about her, and she's learning about herself over the course of these episodes. And that is, you know, kind of the fun inversion of where you start out, and you would think, okay, Shiro's the guy who's constantly got women coming to his place, not for that reason, but for, you know, because people like him, and he's, you know, so he seems to have a fairly good social circle, all of this stuff, and Tohsaka Rin lives alone in this mansion and is a mage and all of that, but she is much more the person I think you would assume Shirou is at the start of the show, and Shirou is the one who's a little more insulated and messed up inside than she is. And I love that kind of how they meet in the middle over the course of the series because of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's that. I think it's part of the same conversation that eventually leads to Archer coming in when Shirou starts training, but where she's talking about Shirou's house, right? And there's this like kind of metaphor that happens where each house kind of represents the person who lives there, right? So Shirou has this like big, wide open manor, and she talks about how she likes the bounded field there because she can feel the human emotion there from, and I don't know if it's meant to be that that's one that Kiritsugu set up later, or if that's meant to refer to literally the one set up by Irisfield in Fate Zero. I'm not sure which, because I think you can interpret it as both, that it's very emotional either way. But that it's this very like kind of emotional space because it's so open. Irisfield, when she gets there in Fate Zero, talks about how the manor itself isn't actually well suited to be a mage's workshop because of how open it is. So that's why she makes the magic circle in that little stone hut, which is then, of course, the thing that, for continuity nerds, that's how Shiro's able to summon Saber, is because that magic circle is still technically there. But she talks about the openness of that space and that anybody is just allowed to come and go. And that's very much Shiro's life, that anyone can come and go. And that there's something kind of very beautiful about how open that is. But there's something also, the thing that she doesn't identify, but I think you can read into that, is the other side of that, is that the people go, right? And we've seen that with Shiro, that all these people get to come here. And, you know, Sakura is coming and she gets to come freely whenever she wants. Fujine comes freely whenever she wants. Shiro gets annoyed when she just comes barging in, but clearly he actually likes having her there. He doesn't want to be alone, but he's never going to stop anybody from leaving. In fact, he's like kind of constantly sort of suggesting that people should be leaving and that people should go. He's like afraid of people getting too close to him. And so you see that like before Saber gets summoned, because Saber's always going to be near him, that at the end of the day, those people leave and he's alone in that house. And then like Tohsaka, she describes her house as the opposite, right? It's that bounded field is one that it's very hard to get in, but once you get in, it's very hard to leave. And that she describes that as matching her own personality. And like, that's, I think, very much true of what we see of Tohsaka, that she puts up this harder exterior to kind of keep people away. And that's part of that mage training. But once people get in and get past that exterior, she doesn't let people go. Like, she doesn't let Shiro be just a stranger. She doesn't let him just walk by her in the school anymore, like they passed each other by in episode 0/episode 1. Now it's like, you know, partially because she's like exasperated and flabbergasted by how fucking stupid he is, but she's not just going to let him go by. Like, this is a relationship that feels like once you have that relationship, it's one for life with her. And I love that kind of metaphor and how those two different spaces define these people and their personalities, both like the good and the bad.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And it's, again, this is where you get into, you can put the archetype labels on the characters and it's fun, but it is so much richer than that when you have someone like Hino Konasu writing it, and this character feels, you know, Tohsaka Rin feels so human and real, like someone you could go meet out in the world. She is not a comic exaggeration of, and I love comic exaggerations in gag animes, but they're often like, you know, like Kaguya-sama, or the Kaguya in the Kaguya-sama anime does not actually exist. That's not a person you would go meet to those extremes. Obviously, there are real things in there, but it's all comically exaggerated. And there's some comic exaggeration here, but it all feels like very much within the bounds of, like, I think actual human relationships, even if those human relationships here do involve magic and stuff, which they don't in the real world. But yeah, no, I love her. I love everyone who comes through Shiro's doors. We should probably talk about the best character in the whole show, Fujimura, Fujine. Just wonderful.
Yes.
Miki Ito, the voice of Android 18 in Dragon Ball. I love that character so much. I hope nothing bad ever happens to her. When she gets taken hostage by Castro, I was like, go, no, you don't, show. You do not hurt Fujine, because she is the most pure, wonderful thing in this show, especially in that episode after you learn that she's going to Kiritsugu's grave and, like, taking care of it and being, like, you know, you realize that really she's a surrogate mom to this boy. All of it's so good. She's the cool teacher. She's the character in Fate Stay Night I have a crush on. It's great.
Yeah, no, that's definitely I feel like I've progressed from when I played the visual novel years ago. Like, Tohsaka was definitely the character I had the crush on. Like, that's the character that is the most human, and I was like, you know, I think she's just like such a cool character. And then yes, now it's like that has moved on to Fujimura, who's like, she's the fucking best. One of my favorite scenes of this whole show, especially now that I am an English teacher. I mean, I'm an English literature teacher, not an English language teacher. But when Kuzuki is like quote unquote sick and she takes over for his class and then brings in like an English pop quiz because it's like, oh well, if it's a Friday afternoon or whatever, and if you guys just have a study period, nobody's gonna get anything done. So it's like, be grateful, and she just throws the pop quizzes at the kids. That's just one of my favorite scenes of this whole show. But yeah, she's just like this bright, shining spot in this whole show where every time she gets to come in, like everything lifts up. She's so incredibly funny. And this is the character that like, in all of the like more goofy spin-offs and stuff like that, they get a lot of mileage out of this character. In the visual novel, they have these sequences that are kind of like breaking the fourth wall comic sequences that happen after some of the bad endings that kind of give you hints on, oh, maybe you pick this other choice, that's what will get you onto the right path. And it's Taiga, and then it's Emiya, but it's not like actually Emiya. It's like she's Emiya playing a character named Student A, basically, for the teacher Taiga. And it's just they break the fourth wall and have a bunch of goofy gags. But yes, like she's just, I think, like a real fan favorite character. And I've always just loved her to death. And this show in particular, when you just the amount of detail you get in the animation and the expressions on her face and stuff and her movement, like she does like done little goofy dances and stuff in the background when she's going to get dinner from Shirou and stuff. They really breathe life into this character so beautifully in this show.
Oh, absolutely. And I love, like, at the beginning, she seems like a very silly or even vain character, constantly coming over to this kid's house and making him cook dinner and stuff. And of course, I think over the course of these episodes, you realize how much she is taking care of him but making it look like she's not, because she knows he's a teenage boy who thinks he doesn't need that. And she's actually doing more than he could probably ever put into words. I also feel like the typical joke with this character would be that she is maybe more like normal at school, and then she's the silly girl outside of school. And I love that the joke is she's just Fujimura everywhere. Like, she's a goofball in her class. She can be slightly more serious, but like she's goofing off with the pop quiz, as you talked about. She's goofing off sometimes with the other teachers, and then she comes home. And really the only difference is, like, Shirou calls her Fujimura sensei at school. I don't know if she would even care, though, if he said Fujine. Like, she is herself everywhere, and I love that about her. And of course, great performance by Miki Ito. Somewhat, a character I'm excited to see in all the other incarnations, because I had no idea there was going to be a character like this. Having watched Fate Zero, I would not have expected there to be a character like this, because there's funnier characters in Fate Zero, but there is no comic relief character on this level. And it is just a great part of this show.
Yeah, it's great. I love the scene between her and Tohsaka when Tohsaka comes over for like the study session or whatever, and just completely like basically like verbally undresses to Fujimura right there. It's like she just can't, there's one of the few places where Taiga cannot win is in a logical argument against Tohsaka. In every other context, like, I love that she's like actually an incredibly effective like practitioner of kendo. Like, she's better at kendo than Shirou is. She's a fun little background detail you get here and there. But Tohsaka is the one person she cannot beat.
Yep. We also do have Sakura around the edges of this one. Don't know much about her yet. My prediction is that Sakura must be one of the masters and is probably Lancer's master, but I don't know that. Because with Lancer, we don't know yet, and Sakura is mysteriously in the background of this show so far. I assume we will learn much more about Sakura either in the second half of this or in Heaven's Feel, but she is more of a background character so far.
Yeah, also just like to set expectations, she is not a major part of this show. Okay. She is, the Heavens Feel is her story. This is like one of the things that I found like always very amusing to think about, the imaginary viewer who watched Fate Zero and then watched Unlimited Blade Works, but didn't understand that there was like a game and all that other stuff, because Sakura's background does not come up in Unlimited Blade Works at all. That's not a spoiler to say, because it's not relevant here. It's incredibly relevant in the movie trilogy. We will get complete payoff for that character there. But I like to imagine the person who had no idea about any of that before those movies came out and just being utterly perplexed by like, how is nobody ever going to bring up all the fucking crazy shit that happened to this character in the last show. Like, it never comes up that she is Tohsaka's little sister. Like, none of that happened. That's not this show's plot. That is all Heaven's Feel stuff. So like, just set those expectations accordingly. But it is very funny to imagine the person just like ending the show being like, what the fuck is going, like, how does it never come up ever?
Because that is probably the one hole in this show as a sequel to Fate Zero, is probably that, right? Of like, you don't really get a clear advancement of her. But I know Heaven's Feel is coming, so it's not bothering me or anything. Yes. And I still like seeing that obviously she and Shirou are close. And I think part of the implication is that one of the reasons why Rin saves Shirou is because he's Sakura's friend. And so, of course...
Yeah, she says when she finds Shirou's body, like, what could I possibly say to her tomorrow?
Yes.
Like, how could I look her in the face? And yes, that's because she knows that Sakura has this relationship with Shirou.
And so part of the implication there, of course, is that Rin definitely knows Sakura is her sister. It's unclear if Sakura knows it the other way. I don't know where that will fall. We haven't seen Sakura's POV on this. But there's even a little monologue by Rin at one point where she talks about, like, she says, like, hypothetically, what would you think if you were adopted out and didn't know that you were, you had to join another family? And I think the person is she not a Saber? I forget who she's talking to.
It's Shirou, and Shirou just has this very Shirou-like response where I think this also is there to imply that Tohsaka doesn't actually know that Shirou is not Kiritsugu's biological son,
right?
Because it's not a thing that he's telling people. But he just says, like, oh, I mean, I don't know if it would matter. Like, if you're happy where you are, you would be happy, and if you weren't happy, like, you would be dissatisfied. And like that, he just gives this kind of very nonchalant response to it.
Right, because part of Shirou's pathology, whatever ways he's messed up, he does not seem to have any, like, angst about having been adopted. He fully views Kiritsugu as his father figure, and, like, whether that was a biological thing or not does not matter to him. And that's also an interesting thread I'm curious to see more of. But yeah, so you have all those characters. Also, Saber is, of course, there. We haven't talked about Saber much in this show yet, other than that she's very cool in action and everything. I do like seeing her in this alternate form in this show, because part of what's so interesting is that I guess if you're reading the visual novel, you would definitely know by Unlimited Blade Works her whole backstory. So it kind of is the same deal there. It hasn't been revealed in the plot of Unlimited Blade Works yet, but whether you saw it through Fate Zero or were reading the visual novel, you would be coming into this story knowing that backstory information, right?
Yes.
And I do feel like the story is built to play on that. It feels like, even if it has not been exposited, you know some of this stuff, because she is obviously more background here because the bigger focus is on Shirou's relationship with Rin, but she is still a major figure here. And I just think it's also so fascinating because Shirou is not a full mage. She always has to be out. She is not really a spirit in the way the other heroic spirits are. She's like a always on flesh and blood person in the world, which is very different than how we saw everything work in Fate Zero.
Yeah, and I think they do a good job of, like, building, I think, a strong continuity with the character from Fate Zero, where, like, to be clear, like, she does remember everything about her previous summoning, which is, so she remembers Kiritsugu and all that kind of stuff, which is actually unusual for a heroic spirit. I don't remember if this show gets into all of this, because this is a bigger part of the Fate route, but Saber technically has not died. She, before her death as King Arthur, she has made a deal with the world to pursue the Holy Grail in whatever form that takes in order to have her wish be granted. So she is not like a normal heroic spirit, so she can retain her memories across summonings, which is a thing that a heroic spirit is not normally meant to be able to do, because she has not technically died yet.
So it's like she's, because we even see that in Fate Zero, she's returned to the battlefield in her actual time, but with the memories of the adventure with Kiritsugu. That sounds joyful. The events of Fate Zero. Yeah. Her fun, lighthearted adventure through Japan with Kiritsugu and Ilias Viel. Just a wonderful time together.
Yeah, exactly. That's why, like, there's no similar scene with Ryder or any of the other servants. Yeah. Like, Ryder's not returned to the moment of Alexander the Great's death or something. He is a full spirit. He evaporates, and, like, that version of Alexander the Great or Iskander is gone forever. And if that character is summoned again in another context or something, they would not be have the same memories or the same experiences, but Saber does. So that's why you do get lots of these really nice little, very meaningful cuts to Saber, where she is like quietly kind of investigating Kiritsugu in a way, like not like, you know, she's not trying to uncover mystery or whatever, but she never understood Kiritsugu, right? She never had a conversation really with her or with him. Like, that's one of the tragedies of Fate Zero, is she never came to an understanding with him. And so she's like quietly shocked by everything she's hearing about this relationship and how much he changed and all that kind of stuff. And I love that. I love, like, because they put more of an emphasis on it here than they do in the visual novel. Because in the visual novel, Kiritsugu is not like an active character. He is someone who has passed on, and all that stuff, particularly his relationship with Saber, is very vague and like much more distant information, because Shirou didn't know any of them at that point in time. So it's very like past information. But here, it's much more kind of feels present for you if you've watched Fate Zero. And so I feel like they emphasize those scenes a little bit more and give Saber a little bit more of that connection to what you saw in Fate Zero. And I love her relationship with Shirou feels even more meaningful in this storyline through that connection, where like the contrast between Kiritsugu and Shirou is so extreme, right? Where Kiritsugu was like the worst person in the world to be Saber's master. Like, they could not have possibly been more incompatible. So incompatible that Kiritsugu gave up on it before he even summoned Saber, and just like basically pawned her off onto Irisfield, being like, you will be better at dealing with this than me. Whereas like Shirou and Saber are very, very similar people. That's one of the things that connects them in the Fate route, is that they both are driven by a kind of childish idealism, and they both are like suffering from really powerful traumas that are very present for both of them in different ways. Like, Shirou is constantly thinking about the fire, he's constantly having dreams about it and stuff, and for Saber, it is like the point she keeps on coming back to. And so that relationship between the two of them, there's like a closeness there, that is like there, and there's a warmth there in the relationship that, particularly after how harsh Fate Zero is on Saber, is so comforting. It's so nice to have scenes where she just gets to sit around and joke and have fun, and you got to see that side of Saber in Fate Zero with like Lancer and Irisfield sometimes, but it always felt so harrowing. And here it's like a mode she just gets to be in all the time, and that's like feels way better.
No, Sean, I completely agree about Saber. One of the things I made note of when I was watching the finale this morning, episode 12, is how many good little shots there are of while Tohsaka and Shirou are on their date, you keep cutting to Saber just enjoying like eating and drinking and just like being out in the city and in the park where they're having their picnic and stuff, and just like, this is a nice day. None of this character drama is on me. Not really my concern right now. I'm just here to have fun. And of course, there are much more like pregnant moments of cutting to Saber earlier in the series, where again, as you say, Sean, you're like, she's learning like, man, Kiritsugu, last conversation I had with him was pretty fucked up. He must have come around as a dad. It is kind of amazing when you think of like her perspective. Like, her final scenes with Kiritsugu in Fate Zero are the big confrontation when he makes Lancer impale himself and then murders two people in cold blood. And Saber has to kill one of them to put them out of their misery. And then, of course, is the final scene where she is ordered to destroy the Holy Grail by him, right? And that's it for her.
Yeah.
And now she's like, he raised a pretty good kid. He's got a good head on his shoulders. No, but I like it, and I'm excited to see where Saber's story goes, even though, as you say, her full resolution, I guess, is more in the Fate route, and that's part of why I want to read the visual novel at some point. But I still feel like she is a very active part of this show, and it still works as a sequel for her as well, I think, seeing her in this zone. And of course, the cliffhanger, the Empire Strikes Back moment at the end of this, of her being taken by Castor and made to be Castor's servant, is such a like dark, wonderful twist of like, man, that is not something I would have expected going in, but it's really interesting to me, and I'm curious to see where that goes, and how kind of her relationship with Shirou works here, because I know, of course, their relationship is more romantic in the Fate route, but they still, I think one of the cool things about Unlimited Blade Works is they still have a very clear relationship that is built between the two of them in this story. It's not like Saber is left by the wayside or something.
No, she's still a very major character. They do, I think, in my opinion, in the second half, they do a very good job of making her feel like she's got an appropriate resolution for the story, even if you don't get a full resolution of all the stuff that is set up necessarily in Fate Zero for her. But yeah, like, my favorite stuff with Saber in this is, well, like, the action is fucking incredible. Like, her fight with Berserker is just unbelievably amazing. But then also, like, just the fun daily life stuff, like episode 12, where she's at the batting cages or whatever, and she's really bad at it because, of course, like hitting a baseball bat with a bat or a baseball with a baseball bat and like using a sword are not the same thing. And so she's just like keeps on smacking into the ground and shooting it up into the air and stuff. But I love one little detail that is the most adorable thing in the world is she's got the fucking baseball helmet on, and her like ahoge, the little like one piece of hair that sticks up her saber, is sticking up through one of the holes in the top of the baseball helmet, and it's so good. That's great. And then another thing they do that I find very funny, it's only ever in the background. They never like make it an actual gag for this show. But a running gag in the like comedy spin-offs of the Fate series always has like Saber is a glutton, so she just loves to eat stuff all the time. And so in the background of this show, she is constantly eating. It's like a fucking Brad Pitt character or something. It's like she just always has food in her hands. She's always eating something in the background when it's not important. It's in like at that picnic scene, she's just like while Shirou and Tohsaka are having the serious conversation in the background, she's just like grabbing sandwich after sandwich from the lunch basket, and it's very funny. Again, they don't like ever make it like they don't Flanderize the character here, which would be easy to do because that running joke had been a running joke for like 15 years or something by the time they made this fucking show. But I like that they have brought that in. That's not really a big thing from the visual novel. They like really dramatically exaggerated it in later stuff to make the joke funny. But here they like elevate it just enough as that kind of running gag for the fans.
Well, that's one of the fun things you can do in an anime that you can't do in a visual novel is like a background character detail. Like, what are they doing in the background of a scene? And ufotable has a lot of fun with that here. Her ahoge, the baseball like helmet moment is the best, but I feel like they use it really well throughout this series. For whatever reason, like just that little top, hair poking up is just always used in fun ways. No, Saber rocks. We love Saber. But man, the character who I might be most interested in this show is Archer, voiced by Junichi Suwabe, who is just fucking fantastic here. And obviously a ludicrously cool character design. The costume and everything, one of my favorite Takeshi Takeuchi designs. I love the white hair and white eyebrows. I love the big red coat. I love that he is named Archer, but you meet him doing cool sword fighting, and you only see his like actual archery later. I love when he says in English the beginning of the Unlimited Blade Works prayer, the "I am the bone of my sword." Something about Junichi Suwabe saying that is the coolest thing I've ever heard. I love this character, and I am so excited to kind of learn more about his deal in the second half of this thing, because what an awesome character.
Yeah, he's super cool. Obviously, like he's still shrouded in like mystery and stuff of like, what he's doing and why is he doing it. We don't always fully know here. But yeah, he's awesome. It's a fucking, I think, legendary performance. Like, this is the character I always think of when I hear Junichi Suwabe in other stuff. Because it's, to me, this is like the character for him, because it's like the tall, cool, handsome guy, but just like that like hint of danger that's always about him, that in this like sometimes a little bit more of a hint, when he fucking rips Shiro's back open with his fucking swords and shit in that fight with Castor, which is pretty brutal. But yeah, no, Archer is just like an infinitely cool character. He also has one of my favorite intros of any character in episode 0. They like reproduced this scene like basically word for word from the visual novel. But I love him being summoned where, Dean has set up her whole like big summoning thing. And she doesn't even have a proper catalyst. We've seen this is a little like Easter egg for Fate Zero people, that the catalyst that they used, the molted skin of the first snake of the world that Tokyomi used to summon Gilgamesh, is broken. Because presumably it is broken because Gilgamesh is still in the world, like he can't be summoned again. But so she has no actual catalyst, but she's trying to just by using a ridiculous amount of mana, just brute force it anyway and try to get Saber, and she ends up, the whole summoning goes wrong because it's supposed to be at like midnight or whatever when her mana is at the highest, but the clocks in her house are all wrong, and so she does it at the wrong time, and so the summoning gets fucked up, and so she has an amnesiac servant that gets summoned, and he's summoned in the floor above, destroying everything in that room. So when she runs up to see him, they reproduce the CG from the game where he's sitting on this like mountain of broken furniture like it's a fucking throne with a like red curtain that's draped over it, and he's there like with his shoulders up and his legs crossed. It's just like the coolest motherfucker in the world. But then the piece de resistance they add here is they give him the coolest fucking musical theme ever, which is this really sick little electric guitar riff that plays this and then as it builds up they add in this whole string section that starts playing a counter melody and these big drums that have this like really sick rhythm that plays. And the Archer theme is my favorite original piece of music for this anime, and it's just like the coolest fucking piece of music that plays every time he shows up and does something badass. And so they really emphasize how cool the character is in this show.
Yeah. No, he rocks. Obviously, a character with a lot of mystery surrounding him that I assume will be the focus of the second half of the show, so we don't need to go too much deeper, but obviously great. Yet another Gundam vet, because now he's kind of Sleg in Hathaway's Flash, so just rack those up in the Fate Stay Night cast, because there's been a lot. But no, I love him to death. Great character, great. And obviously, I think his action sequences are my favorite in this show so far, because him just summoning all these fucking unlimited blades is very, very cool to see.
Yes. Well, I was gonna say, like, with his action, like, one thing I love is he's like, when you get him shooting arrows, I think this is in the fight with Berserker, eventually he, like, instead of shooting an arrow, like, his big move that causes this, like, fucking nuclear explosion shit that almost kills Shirou and Saber, is he just summons this big, like, drill-shaped sword, and just shoots a big sword as an arrow, which is an incredibly cool thing to do.
It's fantastic. Yeah, isn't that when he does the "I am the bone of my sword" line? Is when he gets the big like drill thing out?
I think that might be it.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's so good. But one of the things that interested me about this show is that this was something I was actually curious about. Other than Saber, all of the spirits are new. Gilgamesh is there, but we're not clear what his deal is, because Gilgamesh has just been in the world with Kotomine these last 10 years, right?
Yes.
So anyway, he's around the edges of this thing, but like we have, a new Lancer and Rider and everybody, and they're all great. Most of them we don't know that well yet. Caster is probably the one we see the most, but like we briefly see Berserker because we have Ilya in who I assume we'll have more with her later, but she's in that first scene or that first fight in kind of the first couple episodes. You have Lancer kind of around the edges of this thing. Rider we never meet. Rider is in like one scene and then dies. Yes. Poor Rider. The coolest spirit from the last show, the one who dies here. I assume Rider is a bigger character in the other routes or something, and so they're just offed here.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. We will learn Rider's whole deal in Heaven's Feel.
Okay.
And she also has a much bigger role in the Fate route. Yeah, that's like one of the things that they're able to do with the three routes is that different servants are sort of like brought to the forefront in other ones. So this is like the Caster one. Like Caster doesn't have a huge role in the other two, but she's like a really big deal in this one.
Interesting. Yeah, but I like that. I really like Assassin. He's only in a couple of scenes so far. His fight with Saber is amazing. That's Shinichiro Miki, who we know from Full Metal Alchemist as Mustang from Brotherhood, and brings that same cool guy energy to this Assassin, who is cool even when his chest is ripped open with his ribs exposed because Caster got mad at him. Is he just like that for the rest of the show? It's an amazing little visual design.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's able to heal that one. But
good.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, it gets ripped open, and he's just, he has like the second half of that conversation. He's just standing there, with his chest like cavity literally exposed to the world. And I think what is interesting is like so when he fights Saber, he just announces his true name as Sasaki Kojiro, who, if you know kind of Japanese folklore, I guess is how you describe him. Like, he's a character from the stories about Miyamoto Musashi, who is a real historical figure, like probably the most famous samurai ever. But Sasaki Kojiro is a like folkloric character from a duel that Miyamoto Musashi like had in this that didn't actually historically occur, but it's kind of a legend about him. And so that's who he is. He's the only character who has actually said what his true name is. And he has the Tsubame Gaishi, or the swallow reversal, which is Sasaki Kojiro's supposed like ultimate sword technique that he invented when he tried to figure out how to cut a swallow in flight, which was to could like do 3 sword slashes in one breath, which has become, with the powers of heroic spirit, literally 3 sword slashes that happen simultaneously. As Saber says, it's like 3 blades exist at the same time, which is a pretty cool ability.
Cool ability, cool fight. Caster is voiced by Atsuko Tanaka, who I love because she's the voice of Bayonetta. Japanese voice of Bayonetta. I've always played Bayonetta in Japanese, so that's the only voice of Bayonetta I know, and she is wonderful and brings that same... she's good at playing witches, I guess, because Caster is a very evil witch. So evil she doesn't like it when you call her a witch. But yes, this Caster, it's really fascinating, because obviously Caster is the biggest asshole among the spirits in Fate Zero as well. But here we have a much, much more diabolical plan going on with all of Fuyuki City under her thumb. And I think all of that is super interesting, and it's a great performance.
Yeah, because Atsuko Tanaka, of course, also is the major from Ghost in the Shell, and she's in like a million things. Yeah. She's just like kind of a legendary voice actress. She is also the only time you'll ever hear this reference with Atsuko Tanaka is she is also Bellry's mom from G-Reco. That is obviously not one of her like most known performances, but it is a notable one and a very good show that we've covered.
I love Bellry's mom. Like it sounds minor, but that character is actually really cool. So that's actually I did not remember that, but absolutely, and it's someone. Even if you don't recognize the voice, when Caster comes on screen and opens her mouth, you're like, this is an actor with gravitas. This is someone who has done a lot of work, because that's the only way you get that level of gravitas. And definitely the right choice for... Was she cast for this in the 2006 show, or did they redo it for... Okay. Yeah. That's amazing, because as you say, she's not in that one that much, but it's awesome. It pays off big time here.
Yeah, I think, and I haven't actually watched that show. From what I understand, I believe that they made her a more important character in that show than she was in the Fate route. I think that's one of the changes they made.
That makes sense.
So I suspect that's one of the reasons why they got a really, big deal voice actress to play Caster. Because, the character needs to have a lot of weight, especially because also she's completely concealed, basically, right? She's got this big hood, so you don't get to, do anything really with her facial expressions, so much the character has to be communicated purely with the voice. And I love Caster. Obviously, we've had Kodamine called her the priestess of Colchis. So if you know some mythology, you maybe have figured out who she is or not, but they have not actually said her name yet, so I will refrain from talking about it yet. But yeah, she's awesome. I think it's a good pick when we find out who she is. I like the idea of using this mythological character. And also I like the idea of a caster-based servant, right, who is fundamentally a mage, like Tohsaka or something. She's just a mage from, the mythological age of gods, so her magic is much more powerful than a normal humans could ever be, regardless of her being a heroic spirit on top of all of that. So she is able to manipulate all the mechanisms that make the magical ritual of the Holy Grail War function. And I think that's just such a cool twist. And again, it only works because you have a normal Holy Grail War. It would be kind of weird if that was the first one you ever saw, because it's it doesn't matter if you were able to break the rules if you never got to really learn what the rules were in the first place. But the twist of her having now 2 servants under her own control, and the scene of her showing up in the church and she's got command spells on her hand is such a great image that I think really turns a lot of the premise on its head. The idea of the servant being a master as well and showing up to the church, it's basically demanding the privileges a normal master would get, and to kind of taunt Kodamine at the same time. All that shit I just think is really cool, just on a plot and story level.
I love it, and I especially love the scene in the church because Kodamine obviously always thinks he's the smartest person in the room who has everything under control, and you can just see him fucking shit his pants when he sees those command spells. It's what? Fuck, yeah. I didn't plan on that. And because Kodamine is clearly up to something in the background of the show so far. We don't know what it is yet, but I just love that moment of God, what the hell is going on? Because it is a great idea. Because she has her master is the teacher guy. What's his name? Kuzuki?
Yes.
And
Kuzuki.
But of course, Kuzuki doesn't care. He is so checked out on this whole thing. He's a very powerful mage on his own, but mostly is leaving Caster up to her own devices. Another master I just want to talk about briefly, just mostly because I love the actor, but I do like his role here, is Shinji, who is the master who is not a master very long in this route, until I guess he's doing something with Gilgamesh. But you have Shinji just being an absolute asshole. It's Hiroshi Kamiya doing... Hiroshi Kamiya has such a crazy range, but this is his, asshole teenager voice. But I do love when because he's got Ryder, and when Ryder dies, and then Shinji is like a blithering coward for a couple episodes, Kamiya, like in a bunch of those scenes, moves his voice up into the same register as Penguin from Polar Bear Cafe, and it made me laugh very hard, because there are a bunch of lines where Shinji sounds indistinguishable from the fucking Penguin, and I do kind of love that, because Shinji is such a pathetic asshole character.
Yeah, God, yeah, Shinji's just, he's the fucking worst, he's just such a piece of shit, and, it's like when he's got the advantage, he's like, oh, I'm the most powerful, and I'm the best person around, and then as soon as, she was on the other foot, he's like this scampering little fucking coward. He's just fucking, he's just like the most, you love to hate him kind of character, particularly in this route, where he gets like this particular role. I love there's a whole kind of like implied thing of him having like a crush or something on Tohsaka, and her being completely ignorant to it and just shooting him down dramatically multiple times. And then she describes that one time. This is like the one that directly precedes him activating the curse on the school or whatever, where she describes like her just flaunting this like, oh yeah, no, it's like I completely shot him down, and then I told him, it's like, I don't need you, Shinji, like if you're a master or whatever, because I've got my whole thing with Shirou. And Shirou just being like completely floored by how dumb she is in like not seeing like everything that's going on with Shinji's ego in what he's trying to pursue with Tohsaka. I think it's like he's like a character that you don't get a huge amount of screen time, but I think you get to know who he is as a person very thoroughly over the course of these episodes.
Yes, definitely. I think Hiroshi Kamiya is just good, an actor who can do a lot of shorthand for you in what voice he'll put on also. But no, very, very fun character because of all of that. And I love that, also like the dumb blue hair. There's something about it that just says so much about his character, because it's like, it's aggressively blue. It is, like Shirou has the kind of orangish red hair, but it's a little subdued. His is like, it's like the blue of like the new Fire Emblem game, Fire Emblem Engage, where you've got the half blue, half red. It's like the blue half, that kind of blue. And but like for him it works because he's a total douchebag, and I think that's very fun to see. But yeah, I think there's other characters like Ilya, who's here but we haven't seen much of her, so probably more to say next time if she plays more into the story. I do find it very mysterious what's going on there, but yeah, I think we mostly hit the main characters here.
Yeah, because Ilya and Berserker will play a big role in the second half, so we only have that, like, it's a fucking amazing sequence, but you don't really learn much about what her whole deal here is yet, or like, other than that Berserker is a complete fucking beast, you don't really learn anything about him yet either.
Yes, although she knows Emiya is Kiritsugu's adoptive son, so calls him Onisan, which is creepy for Shirou because he has no idea who this person is. So anyway.
Yes.
But yeah, what else to talk about with this show? I do want to mention the music. So we have a different composer here, but it is the same composer as the visual novel, correct? It's Hideyuki Fukasawa?
So what is, if you have, so Fukasawa is not the composer of the visual novel for Fate Stay Night. He's actually the composer for Mahotsukai no Yoru.
Okay.
So he did that, and then I believe that is then what got him on this project. With Mahotsukai no Yoda also has like a less like bombastic music, but like also very good music. But he worked with Number 201, which is the name of the group of 3 composers that were the composers on the visual novel.
Okay.
Most of their stuff we actually haven't heard yet because they came back. I say came back. I mean, they have continued to do music at Type Moon. They're like people, they're employees of Type Moon. So like all the Fate Grand Order music and all that stuff is Number 201. But in the second half of the show, they use a lot more themes reworked from the original visual novel. So all those like new interpretations of those themes, the original composers from the game came back to do these new updated versions of all those themes. But you only got a couple of hints of it in the first season. Most of that stuff is kind of backloaded. So most of the music we've heard so far is Fukasawa, who didn't do Fate Stay Night, but is so much like in the style of music because he did Mahotsukai no Yoru, and which also collaborated with Number 201. So he's like very much part of that musical family, even if he didn't necessarily do the original game.
So I think that was my confusion because I'm playing Witch on the Holy Night, and there's similarities, obviously. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I just think like it blends so well with the original music, which is one thing that's very impressive, particularly with reinterpreted versions, because obviously the original game has like MIDI music and stuff like that. So the original tracks, which are, I think, are musically good, or would not sound good if you just played them in the show. So they do full reorchestrated versions of it. But his original music blends completely seamlessly with it, and there's a lot of really great original music. I think it's just a phenomenal score. I think Dean has a musical leitmotif that I just adore, that particularly you get like a really great kind of suite of it that plays over the course of episode 0. You've got the big sweeping kind of Unlimited Blade Works theme for the whole show. And then some of the other music, like I point out Archer's theme, which is my favorite in the show. And there's like more going on with the Archer's theme because it ties into other pieces of music as well that we haven't gotten to, that we can talk about in the next season, because it ties into some of the themes that they used in the original game. But it's a really great soundtrack through and through.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm loving it. And even though she is not the lead composer, we still do have Yuki Kajiura here in spirit and sometimes in reality, because obviously Kalafina does the first end theme, which is great, and then we have a couple of her reworked pieces from Fate Zero, as you said. And then just to talk about the other theme songs here, Sean, the opening theme to this season, which is Ideal White, I fucking adore that song. It is so good. The animation that goes with it is so good. It is one of the best, like, get fucking hyped openings I've ever seen. It's just stuck in my head. It's got this cool kind of like 3-part structure where the first third of the song is driven by this kind of like fast string riff, which then there's this break where it goes into a piano riff, and then it's kind of a big giant rock piece for the final third. And I just love the build of it. It gets me hyped every time. And I'm sure the next theme song will be great too, but I'm sad I've now seen it through all the episodes. It's so good.
Yeah, this is one where, like, so the second opening theme, which is Brave Shine by Emiya, like, that one, I think, like, in the popular, it's a rare instance where the second opening theme, I think, is the more well-known one, actually, for the show. And so I had forgotten how good this theme is, because I think of the second opening theme when I think of Unlimited Blade Works most of the time, but Ideal White is fucking great. Yes, and it's a really great opening, and I love particularly the opening animation. I particularly love the shot of Castor in the opening theme. It looks so fucking cool, where she's like under this bridge in the shadows, just like scheming her shit. It's a great opener. And then of course also Believed by Kalafina as your ending theme is great. This is one of my favorite Kalafina tracks. I think it uses that sort of 3-part female vocal harmony thing, which is kind of like the backbone of Kalafina's musical style, just to such incredible effect, where there's like so much going on with the harmony in the vocal piece for that song Believe. And then, as you say, then when you dig into some of the lyrics and how obviously it's a song that was written for the show, it's very much from Shiro's POV, like elevates it even more.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I also love it does a similar thing as the second Fate Zero ending, where it tells you a little story, because it's all individual images about Shirou growing up with Kiritsugu, and then you've also got some stuff with Tohsaka in there, and it's really nice. And then for episode 12, you get the song This Illusion performed by Lisa, but I believe that's from the visual novel, is what I read, right?
Yes. Yeah, so this is a cover of the opening theme from the original visual novel by Lisa doing the cover of it. And yes, that's like where it is like one of the main reasons why I knew I wanted to be adamant about we would do season 1 as its own thing, because it's like this has always stood out to me as such an incredible ending for a season of TV, to get you to both like bring the story you've seen so far to a nice point of resolution, but get you hyped for the next thing. It coming from the visual novel, then bringing back the opening theme from the visual novel, which is very iconic, and playing it over a series of images where the camera, kind of goes through and shows you all the different characters we've met who are now like either like, scheming like Gilgamesh, or we're going to see them like where are they going to be or move into in the second season. And it is my favorite version of the song. I think like Lisa is obviously such a hugely talented singer. She at this point she had done a bunch of stuff like Sword Art Online. So this is not, we had her first big single with Oath Sign. Now she is like this very well established anime singer. They bring her back to do this, using it just once for this theme. I just always thought it was very kind of like, it's a classy move for fans. It's just like very cool that they did that. It is like the version of the song that I listen to when I want to listen to that song now.
It's a beautiful performance. She has the final note of this song, which is the word day, not day like day and night, it's like the Japanese particle DE, but like she holds that note inhumanly long. It's like the end of like a fucking James Bond opening when you're like bellowing it. I mean, it's softer than that, but she is such an amazing singer, Sean. And yeah, it's a great song. And I read that it was for the visual novel, and I guess it's the opening theme, but I would have, if you had told me they just wrote it for this show, it has that effect where the lyrics just so perfectly reflect Shirou's journey over the course of this season, where you're reading or listening to the lyrics as you're watching those final set of images, and then you go into the very movie-style end credits. It's fantastic. Yeah, it's a great song. It's such a classy touch. And it's so cool.
Yeah, and that they play the full song too, which is also awesome. So it's not just like a 90-second cut down version. You get the whole thing. It's awesome. Yeah, it's just such an incredible way to end the season.
It reminds me of how they cut up the Mugen Train arc for Demon Slayer, and even in the TV version, Homura plays in full at the end, because how are you going to do that without it? But they cut it up in such a way that they were able to do that, and that was the right call there. It's the right call here. We didn't talk about this last time. I love the abstract 3D imagery they use in the next episode previews, and then they also use it in the closing credits of the season finale here, where it's like, sometimes it's less abstract, sometimes it's like parts of weapons, or it's the statues of the 7 classes of the servants, but I love all of that, where you'll see or you'll have a 3D model of like one of the summoning signs, or the command's crest, that kind of thing, but I love how it all comes together, and there's all this like light shining on it. It's a super slick way to do next episode previews, and then they also do a big version of it for, like I said, the end credits here.
Yeah, it is very cool, because it gets you, it's the right amount of where you get like a good, like the mood of it, and then you have, some of the key lines from the next episode play, so you've got that like kind of your like next on teaser, but it avoids ever having the problem that you sometimes get with those things where it just like completely spoils what's going to happen in the next episode or something. It's truly just a little tease with like a nice kind of moody visual to associate it with. Yeah, they're very good.
Yeah, I love it. What else is there to say so far? We'll have a whole other podcast next week about Unlimited Blade Works Season 2, but what else to say about Season 1?
It's very good. I just love this show. I've had to like be very careful with trying to make sure that I don't say anything that's to spoil anything. But it's the exact same thing as with Fate Zero, where like it doesn't matter how many times I watch it, like it's just so good every single time again. I mean, I rewatched these shows just 2 or 3 years ago, and it still feels so fresh, watching it, relatively soon after that. And I'm very glad that you're enjoying it as well, because it's fun to share, something that I think is like as cool as something like Fate Stay Night, and have other people enjoy it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm having an absolute blast. The only downside of this whole experience, Sean, is that I can't just fucking binge inhale this show, because we need to have a recording schedule, and we can't, record every day or something. But it's so fun. I hope you guys are enjoying it too, to anyone who's following along with us as a newcomer to this stuff, because this is the goods. Not news. Everyone knew that, but still, it's all new to me, and I'm loving it.
Yeah, it's an amazing show. So next time we will finish Unlimited Blade Works, where we'll be covering episodes 13 to 25. I do want to point out, I don't even know if we'll talk about it that much, because it's not like a big thing, but there is a little tiny 10-minute OVA they did make that is not on Crunchyroll, called Sunny Day, that basically adapts. There's like a good ending to this route in the visual novel, and then there's the true ending. The anime adapts the true ending, and then they did a little OVA that adapts the other scenes that you would have gotten if you got the normal ending or whatever of the route. And so that's what that OVA is. So I'm going to watch that. So I would recommend, Jonathan, you watch it too, and we can talk about it briefly. Again, it's not a huge thing, but you will have to go find it on your own, because it is not on Crunchyroll. So if you
need to sail the high seas, you might need to do that. Get a ship, sail the high seas.
Yeah, it's not very hard to find. It's just not on Crunchyroll. So that is everything we'll be talking about as we wrap up Unlimited Blade Works next time on Japanimation Station.
Japanimation Station.